morning, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Los Angeles Police Department Board of Commissioners meeting for Tuesday, April 9th, 9:30 a.m. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioners Soboroff, Decker, Bonner, and Goldsmith are present, and we have a quorum.
Okay, thanks. Do we have any commissioner comments on items number 1A, B, or C, which are the consent agenda items? Do we have any public comments on items 1A, B, or C?
Yes, sir. We have one card on A, one card on B, and two on C.
Okay,
And
go
it's
ahead.
Mr. Herman on all three,
Okay,
and Mr. Novick on 1C.
okay.
Mr. Herman on 1A.
You can do all three, A, B, and C, if you want.
Good morning to
Morning.
you, Mr. Soboroff. Good morning, Ms. Decker. Good morning, Mr. Bonner. The hell with you, Mr. T. Fang. Because today's situation is dealing with cadets, a program that was started by the so-called Explorer and then fell into the hands of the cadets. And we welcome cadets to these programs because we find them engaging in a policy and practice by the Los Angeles Police Department to engage in ludicies that pertain to why our cadet programs set forth. Well, because I am the legislative body of the Brown Act, let me inform you why. Because we have Robert Kane with the 15-year-old, we have Ken Collard with another.
Mr. President, the speaker's off topic.
Way off topic. You know, this is about
Oh yeah, you're
welfare
right. Look,
fund.
youth,
Yeah, so
welfare,
off
and
topic, yeah.
educational
So stay on
funds.
topic, please.
Hello? Oh, there you go. Test, test. There we go. So, ladies and gentlemen of the quorum, we have observed that the LAPD community with our cadet program has been very successful, although there were a few incidents that were inappropriate. And we have to remind ourselves that these programs are for the community. They're not for you to engage in inappropriate utilization of recreational
So
activities.
let's go to B now.
Well, I got 18 seconds,
No,
sir.
you're off topic again.
So you're
we'll
gonna
go to B.
unconstitutionally violate my rights because you don't let me finish my 2 minutes, just 2 minutes.
This is 1B.
1B, what a bitch. Department report dated April 3rd regarding the Los Angeles LLC, otherwise known as AKA, let me pay you on the backside for a favor on the other side. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, the Dodgers have participated in giving this department money that they don't need. You see, they're already funded by grants and bonds by DOJ, for the record. And so far, the history behind the department's report is inadequate and biased because it results in the fact and manner, as other gentlemen here and other women have spoken, they want to see an itemized list of how this money is being utilized in the effort for recreational activities. Is it going to motel expenses? Is it going to buying gifts, condoms, and whatever
Speaker's off topic,
facilities
Mr.
we
Off
President.
need
topic.
for activities?
Off topic.
This is regarding the Dodgers' food and activities for events. Now, I'm not blind. I, too, like the rest of you, walk around this big city, and I know how we spend our money. Foolishly, lavishly, and our lifestyles
Off
reflect
topic.
that.
Okay, let's go to item number C now,
I
which
got
is,
14 seconds.
no, you don't, relative to a monetary
You're not gonna
donation
observe the
regarding
Bagley-Keene Act?
supporters of law enforcement. You want to speak on C?
C for cunt. Now
Off
that
topic. I'm not going to listen to this.
For the sum amount of $1,837.30. Am I off topic, Mr. Carlos? Mr. Attorney, will you wave in and tell me if I'm off topic?
So that's it. Last, you're done. Okay.
I'm shooting
So who
target.
else is on C? Who else is?
We have Mr. Novick.
Okay, so on, let's have a motion for approval of items 1A and 1B. Do we have a second? I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. 1C, Mr. Novick.
Yeah, 1C is a grant to purchase targets for the officers to maximize their shooting accuracy and effectiveness. I don't think you should be trying to maximize the shooting accuracy and effectiveness of the officers. I think you should be trying to stop the officers from shooting. When they shot Grishario Mack inside the Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Mall, they were firing wildly for several times and scaring people in the mall and breaking store windows, but then they fired their 2 kill shots very accurately and effectively that you found out of policy. So I think that the problem is not how effective they are in their shooting. The problem is they're shooting too often and they're killing too often. And I want to say that on your agenda, you have 2A, 1, 2, and 3. Those
No,
are separate agenda
we're on
items.
1C now.
Yeah, I understand that, but they refuse to accept my cards for 2A, 1, 2, and 3. They said I'd cross out the numbers. If they're separate agenda items, they have separate public comment periods, and I want you to accept my cards for 2A, 1, 2, and 3, just like you do when you have 5A, 1, 2, and 3, and I have commented on each separate shooting by officer-involved shootings of animals and
I hear
people
you.
in the
I hear you.
city.
Let's get
So
back to
please
1C.
Please direct the officer to accept the cards
get
for
back to
2A1.
1C.
That's 1C. I think you should refuse to accept this money, and you should come up with policies that stop your officers from shooting effectively.
Thank you, sir. Do we have a motion for approval on 1C?
So moved.
Do we have a second? I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to 2A. We'll take care of it. No, they're one item.
Mr.
So do we want to
President,
get started or not?
Mr. President, for item,
Go ahead. Mr. Teefank.
Mr. President, for item 2A, the 3 reports are taken together. They are identified in the way they are because there's a separate action required on each of the reports, but it's taken as a total item. All of the items are listed under the one agenda item. If you need further clarification, you could get that from the city attorney.
Thank you. Okay, so please stop disrupting the meeting so we can go ahead. Okay. Well, so we're going to go ahead with the meeting unless you disrupt the meeting, then we can't go ahead with the meeting. It's your choice. Please. That's your last warning. You've been disrupting the meeting, and I'm going to ask you to stop. Please.
He told us to seek clarification from the city attorney.
We did.
Very clear.
We did. Okay, so we're let's start with the Inspector General on the report.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, everyone's staff, Chief. As you may recall, at the March 12th meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners, OIG presented its review of selected LAPD data-driven policing strategies. During that meeting, we announced the public was invited to provide commentary on the OIG's report for a 2-week period after that meeting for further consideration by the Police Commission. I'd like to sort of briefly summarize for you the commentary that was received during that time period. OIG received a total of 819 email responses from individuals as well as 2 written responses from organizations. Starting with the emails, out of the 819, 99% of them contained identical or nearly identical text, and I'll get into that a little more in just a moment. 1% contained individualized, not identical written context, and 1 was blank, did not contain any material. Although no location was required or anything else was required for submission, a number of these submissions did include indications of where they originated from. Just over a third originated there from Los Angeles. 58% originated from somewhere else in the state of California. 7% were from outside of California, and we did have quite a few other states across the country, and just a small number did not indicate any origin. With regard to those 2 responses submitted by organizations, one was from the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and the other from the ACLU of Southern California. Speaking generally, all the responses that I've described so far received by the OIG during the response period range in content from expressing concern over the use of predictive policing to calling for an end to predictive policing and the laser and predpol program specifically. None of the responses received by OIG expressed support for predictive policing during the designated response period. What I imagine may be helpful, just to give you a bit of a context, we have included all the responses that we received, although just one copy of the email that had basically identical text for 99% of the responses, but we did include all the responses received in the agenda packet for today. In case it's helpful, I have just a couple of selections of what we received that might be reflective of some of the sentiments that we were seeing. I'd like to read off for you the sort of identical or nearly identical language that received in 99% of the responses. It's fairly brief. Dear Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners, I'm writing to urge you to end both laser and predpol programs. OIG's audit has highlighted some glaring problems with both programs that can't be addressed through simple reforms. For close to a decade, LAPD has used predictive policing tools in order to predict where crime will happen and who will commit the crime. These programs have not made our communities safer. They've reinforced racist policing practices that are criminalizing people of color, youth, and poor people in Los Angeles. The resources that are being wasted on these programs, expensive programs, could instead be redirected to fund initiatives that promote real public safety, employment, education, public housing, health centers, and youth development. I urge you to please end predictive policing in Los Angeles. And then lastly, if it's helpful, there were a number of emails that included additional language beyond that identical language. For example, in my years living in LA, I've only witnessed the police harming communities. I've watched the police harm my neighbor with mental illness. I've watched them harass my homeless neighbors day in, day out. Another one says, I also urge you to end the business relationship between UCLA, LAPD, and Predpol Inc. LAPD sends the wrong message when they use public funds for secret programs and disguise it with quote-unquote science in order to legitimize these programs. And lastly, I'll give two examples of emails that did not contain that same identical language in 99%. They contain their own language, and just give you a flavor of two of those. One says, end the laser and predpol programs, stop criminalizing being black or poor. What we need is programs that will help Angelenos not make their lives worse. And second, I'm an anthropology student at UCLA, a pediatric physician, and my research area is services for people with serious mental illness in LA, which includes many interactions with law enforcement. Data-driven policing is not a neutral or quote-unquote scientific approach to policing. Crime intervention via patrol, which is the framework for data-driven policing, is like a doctor patrolling a neighborhood waiting for a heart attack. It does not work. That was, again, inside the 2-week response period that was designated for this after our report. Outside of the responses sent to OIG during that period, the commission, of course, heard public comment during the March 12th meeting. There will be further public comment today, I imagine. I was made aware of approximately 4 additional communications from individuals indicating an affiliation with either UCLA or Columbia University. And OIG received a number of emails outside the response period as well. All of those sort of expressed similar concerns to the ones I've raised, with one exception. There was one message we received outside the response period which advocated for the continuation of laser and predpol as tools to continue reducing crime in Los Angeles. That, I hope, is a brief summary of the public comments I received in the 2-week designated period and slightly beyond. And I'll be happy to take any further questions. But again, the materials are all available to you as part of the agenda.
Okay. I'd like to hear from, so if we're going to have disruption in the meeting, then what we'll do is we will recess the meeting. So please don't disrupt the meeting. We'd like to hear from the department and the chief now. And then we'll go to commissioner questions, and then we'll go to public comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Silveroff, and good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
I'm Bob Arcos, the Director of the Office of Operations. The Chief has also charged me with the direct oversight of precision policing as we move forward. With me is Commander George Rodriguez, Assistant to the Director of the Office of Operations. We've submitted our response to the report of the Office of the Inspector General, and we have endeavored to address each of the stated objectives identified by the Office of the Inspector General. We have identified our inconsistencies that were in part due to a decentralized model of oversight of the program and a lack of clear guidelines. We have begun to prepare for the transition from laser to precision policing, which will no longer use chronic offender bulletins and/or anchor points. As an organization, the department will continue to seek opportunities to improve our service delivery and the impact of crime-fighting efforts are having in the community. Since data-driven efforts Since data-driven strategies are still an emerging field, the development and implementation of the new technologies will further refine their use and provide opportunities to obtain independent evaluations of the efficacy and impact of each data-driven policing programs. With that,
Okay.
yeah, with that, we're available for questions, Commissioners.
Chief, will you, before we begin the commissioner questions, will you give a statement, your thought about what we are not going to continue to do, what we are going to change, and what we are going to continue to do in relation to these programs?
Commissioners, thank you, and good morning.
This proposal for the department, Jeff.
The department's response, as briefly outlined by Chief Arcos, let me just take a more broader framing of this to begin with. First and foremost is our efforts in applying police resources in Los Angeles is meant to do it in a manner and strategies that are viewed as fair, rational, that we take advantage of systems and data and the value of research, that as we look to the public to build trust, that we use strategies, and when challenges to those strategies exist, that we look at them cleanly to explore the basis for those challenges and whether adjustments should be made. This is an evolution of policing that has existed during my entire time with LAPD, and LAPD is seen not just here, but across the country as an agency willing to learn, that is engaged in efforts to use its finite resources to smartly and in a manner that provides for public safety, and has achieved results. Today, as a department and as a city and as a region, we are experiencing some of our lowest levels in crime, both property as well as violent crime. Yet, there are substantial and real challenges. And as we look at our policing resources, we will continue to seek strategies and explore ideas to how to smartly go about using those resources in a manner that builds trust, that recognizes bias, that understands community concerns relative to the past of policing, which may in the past have exercised those biases more arbitrarily. And I'm committed in what we stated in this report is a framework of moving forward that does a couple things. We're going to stop using, as I initiated last August, we will no longer use chronic offender bulletins. The process, while I understand in the LASER program and understand the research as well as the methodology and the designed outcome or the desired outcome, our experience over the years found the process of systematically and regularly identifying individuals who, based on their prior criminal arrests, convictions, and activities, suggested that they would be or could be individuals re-engaging in acts of particularly violent acts in a neighborhood or in an area of a command was worthy of exploring. And
Sir, I'm going to ask you to stop disrupting the meeting, or I'm going to have to recess. I'm going to have to recess the meeting. So if you can't stop, then we can just recess.
so the physical process of identifying chronic offenders through the bulletin process, in my view and our view as a department and senior leadership, did not bear the types of results that in the face of its criticism and in the face of concerns relative to whether or not the underlying algorithm truly was fair and unbiased, for us to continue it going forward. And so this is when those questions arose by the public and by this commission last summer. We took a look. We also looked and reflected upon our own personal experience as leadership of this organization and said, let's cease this. And today, I want to be clear, we're not going to reinstate that. For offender-based strategies, though, it is important for us as we look at crime, our efforts to reduce crime and provide for public safety, is that the role of the offender is a critical area of law enforcement that we cannot ignore. Nor does the criminal justice system ignore it, nor does a community ignore it. Identifying how to examine who the offender is and how they interplay in a community safety is something that we will continue to try to strive to find ways that are rational, that are fair, that are defendable to those that would feel that we're preying upon a particular group or subgroup. Secondly, as to location-based strategies, which is primarily the PRED-POL difference. The difference between these two programs is LASER, as was articulated, was primarily focused on violence reduction, particularly street violence, that had locations that had a hotspot or over-concentration. It wasn't just a randomized, but these were heavy concentrations of street violence. And what was the characteristics of those locations that may facilitate or somehow they found victims being more victimized in those areas, and how could we work with those communities and work with all the stakeholders to improve the resilience of that area so that it would not experience those high levels of violence. That was LASER. LASER also added an offender component, which is to identify individuals that we, under the theory that there were select individuals that were preying upon those neighborhoods and using violence in those neighborhoods. And the methodology to identify those offenders based on their past criminal conduct and actions in those very same neighborhoods, we did not see an effective return on that, and so we will stand that down and have stood it down, and we'll continue to do so. On the location aspect, PRED-POL, unlike LASER, does not have an offender aspect to it. It has a location of a crime occurring, particularly property crime. And we rely upon our own experience as law enforcement executives and professionals in this department, as well as studied research and evaluations both by universities as well as the Department of Justice, the NIJ, and others that looked at BJA, that look systematically at department strategies to reduce crime, working in community settings, in partnerships, and the use of data. And we will continue in using PRED-POL in its current configuration with adjustments that have been made, because we found through this study that there were problems with its focus. Specifically, the fact that it involved areas such as police stations, that crime was not occurring at those stations, they were being reported. So if there was...
You'll all have your chance to talk in public comment, but if
there
you
was a
decide to
bias-
talk while someone else is talking, that's disrupting the meeting, so we'll have to recess the meeting.
So if there was to the extent that there was a bias in that and a miscalculation, those adjustments have been made. But I will fall back to that the organization and policing in general, since the 1980s, has relied upon upon research and its own practical experience, that officers without specific information about underlying instances of crime and disorder in neighborhoods, who are left to simply go about their patrols or in some randomized manner move about, get very randomized results. That crime does have a habitual and a pattern sense to it, as does many other human behaviors. And that there is an underlying value of using data systems and smart policing that takes advantage of those human behaviors in an effort to protect the public, in an effort to improve the safety of community. And at the end of the day, what we have to ensure is that as we go about exploring and using new ideas of this or descriptions of it, is that we do so in a manner that recognizing the community is going to listen to our descriptions. And we have to avoid, we must avoid phrasing and terms that suggest, that undermine the dignity of an individual, that undermine the dignity or safety or the value of a community. So that's what our commitment is going forward. When we talk about anchor points, moving away from that phraseology, recognizing that while well-intended in the past, that served as a description of a location that was frequently experiencing crime, that it in of itself is a location that is not an anchor to that community. It's not sinking that community. Hopefully this has brought some context to what we are going to do moving forward. I will close by two last aspects. We will continue to work with all of our communities productively in a manner to identify, if not this, then what? If not location-based strategies, if we cannot look at individuals who are committing crime, then what is your suggestion to protecting people who are being preyed upon by others? What, and to the solution, and
Sir, I'm sorry, sir. I'm really sorry. This is your last warning. You'll have a chance to talk in public comment. Thank you.
so we are willing and willing and will continue to reach out and deal with and work with all of our communities to understand alternatives, viable alternatives, rational alternatives, alternatives that reflect some pragmatic approach in a democracy such as ourselves, that we find ourselves in. Secondly, is our outreach has begun to identify in a university footing further research and evaluation of going forward, what is our mechanisms of identifying situational awareness, of identifying crime and disorder, and what are the, and how have our strategies that we're currently using, such as the Community Safety Operations Centers, such as mission sheets and descriptions of what our actions we want our officers to engage in, patrols we want them to be a part of, how we evaluate that through the CompStat process, the accountability loop of that. Does this current model, this framework that we're acting under, what are areas for improvement, what are areas that can be refined, and as we move forward in our effort to build community trust.
Okay,
That
thank you,
concludes
sir.
my remarks.
Okay. Commissioners, we'll start with Vice President, I'm sorry, the Chair of the Committee.
Oh, just
Yeah.
the committee,
Yeah.
Commissioner Bonner and I.
Okay.
Thank you. Chief, could you just articulate what is this precision policing model? And also, when will implementation begin? And at what point do you think you'll begin to see the types of results from this new strategy that would enable you to begin to determine what's working and what's more or less effective?
So the transition to a phraseology of this process of precision policing, it is a phrase that is developing its attributes, if you will, as we speak, not just here in Los Angeles, but across the country. Precision policing strives to identify through data, through an awareness and partnerships with communities and its stakeholders, how do we go about in a more precise manner, to use the turn of a phrase, in identifying those persons responsible and that should be held accountable for crimes, whether it be property or violence. Also, in a precision sense, what are the strategies in dealing with locations and with victimization that can help improve the resiliency to in effect, lower crime? Crime prevention is our primary pursuit. It is not the apprehension of offenders. Prevention of crime is what we strive to do as an organization. Identifying and holding offenders and bringing them before the justice system is a responsibility that we have to every victim and to the safety of a community. And it has a deterring effect to further acts of violence, further crimes of opportunity. But it is in this precision policing model that we're evolving to. I'm wishing and I would desire for us as an organization to move beyond the at times fair criticism of what Laser and Predpol has represented as governing strategies of this organization. And at the same time recognize that we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater, that policing has a role, a significant role in the safety of a community. And that to ignore that or suggest that policing has no role in our society is a matter that is certainly, as an American, I welcome people to have that debate. But as a chief of this department and as a responsibility to the 4 million people who live in this city, I am governed by that motto to protect and to serve using these values on my right, and we will strive to do that in manners that have been proven successful, while recognizing we will be forever committed to continually improve the manner in which we go about policing. That's not doublespeak. That is meant to suggest to you that we have a fundamental disagreement with members in this audience about whether or not an armed or a law enforcement agency has a role in a community's safety.
You just don't want to lose your job, that's all.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, and,
Commissioner, can I just?
sure.
Go ahead. Just wanted to add that we've already begun the training with the Community Safety Operations Centers. We've had 2 citywide meetings with all of our Bureau of Crime Analysis details, and every area crime analysis detail and the detective commanding officer. You know, one of the things, again, that we learned from the report was just, again, the lack of consistent application across our 21 areas. So we've already put that in place. We were joined by the Office of Special Operations to ensure that we also develop and design specific Metropolitan Division packets as well. That's part of it in building out the consistency. And under the leadership of Commander Rodriguez, he's already selected the training cadre that will go to all 21 areas to ensure that we are rolling out precision policing exactly across the city as it should be.
Great.
Commissioner, in addition to that, this is Commissioner Rodriguez, in addition to that, we have a working group that is putting together a manual that is going to be available to all these individuals that are going to be involved, all the CSOCs and our crime analysis details as well. So that way there'll be uniformity throughout the entire city as to what is the expectations are, what the processes are going to be, and how they are to deliver that product.
Great. So I just want to thank the members of the community who have brought forward significant concerns about this over several years, and in particular at the hearing that we had and in this public comment process. And it's certainly clear that there are a lot of concerns and fears about the use of this data and the proactive and suppression-based crime-fighting strategies that the concern is that that's having a disparate impact on certain communities, in particular low-income communities of color. And so, that's why this report was important to me and this process is important to me, is to understand that better. And unfortunately, our ability to understand those impacts has been limited based on the issues that have been raised in terms of consistency of data collection and practice of these strategies. So I really appreciate the department's response. I appreciate the chief's responsiveness to these concerns and willingness to really just stop, put certain things on hold, stop certain programs, and really reevaluate and do things differently going forward. I think that's I really appreciate the leadership that shows and the genuine efforts to respond to community concerns and to improve these programs. Again, sort of in this moment where there's very limited information about what this is going to mean going forward. So I do appreciate the quarterly reports back to the full commission. I think that'll be very helpful. The first one, I think, then would be in July. For this subcommittee, I would like to ask that this manual come back in its draft form before it's finalized to the committee, and also that the committee have input into the research design of the external evaluators to make sure that the original questions that we wanted the Inspector General to explore that were not fully answered in this report, that those get either addressed in the academic study and or that the Inspector General then prepare a process to evaluate those same questions when these programs are up and running. And so given the uncertainty of where we are right now, I would suggest that in July, when this comes back to the full commission, at that point, that we have a time frame for when the programs will be in place long enough for data to be collected and evaluated to determine the impact this is having on crime and on particular communities. Also, if there were to be, I really appreciate the elimination of the chronic offender bulletin and the clear understanding by the department of the problems with that program, and if any type of program like that were to be created again in the department, I would ask that come back to the commission to ensure that it doesn't have the challenges that the chronic offender bulletin program had, and that we're able to monitor that going forward. And I'll just say too, I think the focus here is on these data-driven policing strategies, on suppression policing. But as you've said, I mean, the real goal is prevention, although deterrence is part of that. That prevention is the goal, and that addressing sort of the root causes of crime in these communities is the larger purpose. And so I would like to explore community policing practices that the department is undertaking, and potentially, new and innovative approaches that we can have to addressing some of the root causes of crime that aren't just about suppression policing, but that are other strategies that together take a more comprehensive approach to addressing the underlying issues.
Commissioner Bonner?
Thank you. First question, I'm sure that this is obvious. You were reading, I think you have this is the
Speak into the mic, so.
this is the department's response to the IG report
Yes, sir.
that you have in front of you. Okay. I'm just going to walk through some questions relative to that document first,
Sure.
if you don't mind. First question with regard to some of the terminology, because I heard the chief mention some of the sensitivities around that, which I share, but it's not clear to me what the precise status is. So the subject line of this still uses the data-driven policing strategies, and then in the first sentence under the background refers to this term that I'm seeing now, smart policing. So can you just share with me kind of the difference between those two terms, and is smart policing now the new term that's being used, or is it a term that's been used prior that I was just not aware of, or what's the meaning of that?
Yes, sir. So Smart Policing came about in 2011 as a joint venture with the Bureau of Justice of Administration.
And by the way, I'm not asking for history on what I'm asking for is relative to this this report. I don't recall, and I could have just missed it in my reading the IG's report and so on, but we were using the terms data-driven policing, and I'm just asking the relationship between that term and smart policing.
I'm sorry, the relationship between Smart Policing and which one?
Data-driven.
Data-driven. Absolutely.
This has been agendized as a conversation about data-driven.
Absolutely. So smart policing was the overarching terminology that was utilized to describe laser and PredPol, which was the two data-driven strategies that were under the smart policing program. It was a system identified to leverage the data that was there, to data mine in essence, and identify a more precise manner in which policing could be delivered. Instead of the random patrols that the chief spoke about earlier, it was the ability for us to focus our officers in a smarter manner so that they are more precise in their activities in their communities.
So at this point, I won't belabor the point because it's really a question of almost semantics. All I'm asking is, the IG's report was a review of selected data-driven policing strategies. Now I'm seeing a memo that's addressing smart policing. I'm just wanting to make sure I'm using the proper term in the conversation.
It's synonymous, sir.
All right. Well, I'm going to continue to use data-driven policing if it doesn't matter. On the bottom of page 2, there's the first couple of pages are kind of summarizing some of the status quo. The bottom there's the last sentence in that page says the department's review of those identified with few or no points did not identify individuals without a criminal history or who were uninvolved in prior criminal activity. And I'm wondering if you can clarify that, what the intent or the meaning. I just want to make sure it's not suggesting that, hey, we found people who had some criminal history, so it's okay to violate their rights in a way different than somebody who doesn't have any history. I'm not putting those words in your mouth, but I'm wanting to understand what that sentence is intended to signify or point out.
So let me first of all say that the identification of a chronic offender, we in our description of its initial rollout, its pilot efforts, as well as it built across the city, across all the areas of the department, was initially meant to identify violent offenders as part of the LASER program. The individual being identified as a chronic offender in and of itself did not justify a reasonable suspicion for a stop or detention or an arrest, and nor did it justify or identify any ability of the organization to ignore a person's constitutional rights. There's no suggestion of that in any of the training or the literature that was provided as incomplete as the Inspector General found it, and its description of each instance It was much as a offender bulletin, an information bulletin is given as to a suspect involved in a crime, perhaps an image caught of a burglar that was broken into a home and was captured by a CCTV, and that information bulletin that's put out, that actually has more information into it that may justify a reasonable suspicion for a stop than a chronic offender bulletin. A chronic offender bulletin was meant to provide officers with information about individuals that, on the basis of their prior conduct, suggested that they may be involved in the crimes that the officers are now in an effort of patrolling or conducting their investigative work toward. So it's a tip, it's a lead, but in each of the bulletins was remarks.
Sir, I'm going to ask you to stop disrupting the meeting. I promise you, sir in the green shirt, when it's your turn, when you're speaking, you won't be disrupted, but you will not be disrupting anyone else. This is your final warning, sir. So please stop disrupting the meeting. Please stop disrupting the meeting.
The individuals, what the point of this was to clarify.
Oh, because I didn't see you. And now that I do see you, it's your final warning because I couldn't see you. Thank you. That's exactly the reason. I couldn't see you there. Thank you very much. Okay, go ahead, Chief.
The Inspector General's review of the chronic offenders found that in areas of the city that there were offenders that were identified that were not necessarily individuals that had a violent crime history or prior offenses. Areas that, when in our review of this, was we looked at their work as well as in talking with our area commands, we found areas that did not have high concentrations of violent crime, that had higher concentrations of property crime, that they went to identify habitual or chronic or repeat offenders and used this mechanism. So that the algorithm or the point schedule that was heavily weighted for violent crime or possession of a gun was not truly applicable to the burglary suspect or the auto theft suspect, because while that individual may have been arrested previously multiple times for burglary or for auto theft, maybe on probation or parole for such underlying conduct, that they didn't have offenses that were violent crime. So it was a tool that was applied by the area in an effort to address concerns of what are you doing with chronic offenders that varied from the desire. That's what it was also meant to be, is that we have no information today that anyone who was identified as a chronic offender was simply someone picked at random, some that was just had no involvement with law enforcement in any fashion or form, and yet someone simply tried to put a name on a bulletin to satisfy an area command, a bureau command, or a CompStat inspection.
Yeah.
And on that last point, I just want to make sure, but you're not taking comfort in the fact, if somebody was identified in a bulletin and should not have been, you're not taking comfort in the fact that, okay, well, the mistake is somewhat okay because they did have some prior criminal activity. I just want to make sure that's not the perspective.
This is not.
Right.
This report is not made to take comfort. It's made to clarify, because I think as the public looks to questions of how LAPD identified offenders, we have a responsibility to, if it were, as one might interpret, as suggested, that, or people interpreted or pulled from the report as a meaning that we just picked someone on a basis of no conduct in the past, that we have an obligation to report to mitigate that by a sense of what we did actually see in our experience as far as those identified.
Yeah, Commissioner, I think it speaks to everything that we've identified, the inconsistencies and decentralization, and then in our expansion of laser to other areas. Not all areas were designed to have laser, but we put it there. But all areas have chronic offenders, but these chronic offenders were not all violent offenders. There are chronic offenders that drive property crime in certain parts of the city, burglaries, motor vehicle theft, et cetera. So when the commands are preparing for CompStat and the questions are coming up about their chronic offender bulletin list, how are they doing? They were coming up with chronic offenders that were driving their crime. But again, it wasn't being, again, there was no oversight to how they were developing those chronic offender programs.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going on to page 3 relative to the offender-based programs that is noting the discontinued use of the chronic offender bulletin And it says, in their place, the department will return to its practice of drawing critical information from physical descriptors of reported crimes, et cetera. Can you just clarify the status of this program? So I get, as I've heard a lot, that the chronic offender bulletin has been discontinued as of August. So that's clear. But what does the rest of this mean in terms of what's in its place?
So currently, Commissioner, one of the things that we're doing is this is akin to a wanted type flyer. As we develop information, specific information from a crime victim as it relates to a specific identifier, whether it's a tattoo, as a birthmark, anything that specifically signals this individual as the offender, we'll put together a wanted bulletin for sorts to provide that to the officers during their mission so that they can be on the lookout for this individual to see if this is the one connected to the specific crime. In addition to that, we will obviously rely on our parole and probation partners, asking them to see if they've had an individual that fits the description, that has a specific identifier that could be related to this specific crime. Again, in addition, that would be helping to try to remove or either identify or remove the individual from committing an ongoing offense.
So what I'm still trying to understand is, with the termination of the chronic offender bulletin, is there another process in place where you're capturing information that'll be used in the same way that chronic offender bulletins would have been used, or are you moving away from the approach behind the chronic offender bulletin?
We are completely moving away from that approach. We are not maintaining the database as we were with the chronic offender program. This will all be done in real time as that information is developed.
Okay, and I'm going now further down on the same page to the questions regarding location-based programs, and similar issue that I can't quite tell what the status of this is in terms of you're identifying changes that are in process, changes that have been made since the IG's report and that are already operational. Something else? Can you characterize kind of what the status is as we sit here today?
Absolutely. So all the laser zones that we had in the past have been eliminated. We're no longer identifying those laser zones. What we're trying to do is identify those micro hotspots or those places where crime is really concentrated, as the chief alluded to earlier, with crime locations, victimization. And we're going to the crime generators and crime attractors. These are locations where, for instance, a problematic liquor store that has a propensity for individuals to hang around and generate crime. That for us would be a crime attractor. A crime generator would be like a parking lot with a large number of vehicles at a venue that has a high propensity for vehicles being broken into. So within those micro hotspots, we're going to try to identify, as Commissioner Goldsmith identified, is the root cause of what is driving crime, so that we can specifically identify it and provide the appropriate measures, whether it's through community intervention, whether it's through our own officers, whatever the case happens to be, so that we can eliminate the crime and disorder that's occurring in that particular spot.
So, Commissioner, one more quick point to make.
Let me go back up to a higher level. What I'm trying to understand is this document that I'm kind of reviewing through was presented to us as a summary of steps the department has taken, which I could be wrong, but I'm interpreting it as steps the department has taken in light of the IG's report, since the IG's report. So that was some 3-4 weeks ago. And so the way it's presented is as if in the past 3 or 4 weeks we've made all these changes, everybody's been trained, everybody's now up to speed, and we're just fixing issues. So I'm trying to understand if these are changes that are in process and that are going to be made, or are you saying really that people on the street and patrol now exactly know what they're supposed to be doing in regards to this?
So it's in process, number one, but so the information that was you asked earlier about getting away from chronic offender bulletins and how we're going back to more BOLOs or wanted suspects and descriptions, that is fundamental and foundational work of law enforcement. That has existed for decades of work. The officers will always use that, working their information from crime reports, from talking to victims, to speaking to witnesses, to speaking to suspects on the street, and then the use of video intelligence for that as well. That is still going to exist. But as we continue to move forward with the training and developing the rollout and the manual for precision policing, the officers still know what to do. They still know what to do. They're still getting information. They're still driven by crime alerts and what's going on through their roll calls of their smart boards, their information from detectives. There's nothing on hold there. The officers are still working.
And let me just draw your attention to, I believe you're on page 3, location-based programs.
Yes.
With respect to the location-based component consistent with academic literature of precision policing, the department is currently in the process of evaluating the suitability. So it speaks to the fact that we're in the process. As you look through this, it speaks to in the following page that as we transition our efforts, what we're going to work on, and then the last page speaks to the fact that we have training, development of written materials. The organization is constantly evolving in its abilities, and it has a bit of, I'll call the word tradecraft, of strategies that have proven effective and others that have not. Transference of that, I think, it's fair here that this manual that's been asked for, that's been articulated as our response, is we need to better memorialize that tradecraft. That how is it? Where are they now? What does that mean when I say where are they now? What does that mean to a detective or to an officer that is trying to understand where crime is occurring in his or her area? So we need to memorialize these practices. A BOLO, be on the lookout. What is a BOLO? What, to your term of what is smart policing versus data-driven? We're never static. There is a certain amount of capabilities or capacity today that we administer. And I think what the Inspector General's reports saw and found is what we see and experience in policing. Every CompStat inspection, every CSOC briefing, every briefing that occurs in a roll call room or a squad bay is an evolutionary process of reinforcing those strategies, informing on new strategies or existing practices that we want our people to engage in, and providing that instruction, guidance, and oversight so that they go out and execute in a manner that's consistent with our values. But it's never, I don't think we'll ever be there, because each year we hire 500 more officers and 500 more people who come in to a profession that has historic levels of practices and actions and activities and strategies that we have to instill by training and by experience. And that process is, our commitment is continuous improvement, is to keep going at that. And when Inspector General or our own internal review finds shortfalls in it, which we will in an organization of our size, is we're going to take efforts to accept those shortfalls, not defend them, but lean into them and find better ways and continue efforts to inform our people so that they are best suited to go out and do some difficult work.
Okay, I've got you alluded to a couple of points I'll come back to in just a minute if I could. But in the same area, there's the question about the academic literature, and we've had some email and public comments and things about that. Can you tell me just really kind of how brief or how broad and this literature review has been, and how broadly you kind of surveyed the landscape to inform either the prior programs or, more importantly, the changes that are in progress?
So let me invite Chief of Detectives, Deputy Chief Sean Malinowski, to this discussion, if I could, at this point.
Morning, sir.
Good morning. So, sir, this literature review that was done is not on the level of something that would have been done for a doctoral dissertation, but it's something that, from reviewing what's being done in other cities and looking at recent articles, like the recent article on precision policing and looking at what they've been doing in New York with some of the same concerns, it seems that the public wants the police to be more precise in what they're doing. And the literature talks about location-based and some of the academic studies that have been done on that. But I wouldn't say that we have written a dissertation here. We've more summarized what's been written about precision policing.
There is the National Academy of Sciences published a consortium of where we're at across the sciences in policing. And it spoke, and it gave a literature review that I'll be happy for us to make available to the commission that actually articulates. Research is filled with variability. It's a continuum of where people land on issues of what research proves and what research doesn't prove. This was a booklet that a collection of a respected institution, a nonpartisan institution, that said here is a inventory of where the sciences are at on these various location and offender-based strategies that are used in policing across America, ones that have found statistical differences and others that are still open for debate. In summary, our review of this now nearly 2 years ago found that location-based strategies have found continued support and correlations between agencies that focus on proactive, data-driven design deployments, placement of officers in locations that have seen concentrations of crime that are not just on a randomized basis, but that are being draw points, versus offender-based systems, which are much more subjective and much more unproven as to whether or not risk-based assessments of people who are incarcerated and recently released, or those that have or in released in a community, risk-based assessments as to their proclivity or their likelihood of reoffending. The research is much less clear on that, which is in part informing us on where we're at today in policing in Los Angeles, is that if the offender-based work is so uncertain, then why are we losing, I don't want us to lose public trust because of belief that the underlying weights and values have an inherent bias to it. If we can't answer that question, then let's pull back from that strategy, but let's not pull back from strategies that are well understood across American policing, that cops count, and officers responding in the neighborhoods and working in those neighborhoods with an understanding of individuals who are preying and criminalizing or victimizing people in those neighborhoods, that those officers having that information can interrupt that, both by their presence, but also have a responsibility to identify and bring to justice those individuals who are offenders. So that's kind of where we're at. But again, we will be happy to get you that collection forthwith.
Well, let me just ask, I'm going to just ask a little bit about the UCLA communications we've had, since we've had, that was part of what the Inspector General alluded to as the public comment that came in, and we did receive some other information from them. Are you familiar with the letter that we received, the long list of signatories? So in that letter, they at least identify some other individuals, I think, that are held out as experts in this area: Columbia professor Bernard Harcourt and Harvard mathematician Kathy O'Neill. Are you familiar at least with either of those academics and what their research
Yes.
indicates? So can you give me an example just of, say, one area or one issue where there's a point of disagreement and pinpoint where the academic literature comes out on? Just give me both sides of the issue.
So I think that there is an ongoing debate in academia about the taking anthropological research in particular and applying it to criminology and the blending of those two fields, and then, as has been described in some of the comments here, turning that into a business. And so I think there's some people have an objection of taking what was meant to be pure research in the past and then expanding it to criminology and then coming up with a business plan and implementing that in the real world. That seems to be the rub.
In the letter, the document that I'm looking at refers in particular with regard to these two academics. It says they've expressed their serious skepticism about the empirical and ethical rigor of the research. Again, can you tell me kind of what the fault line is there relative to the quality?
So there were some studies that were done initially to try to look at the effectiveness of predictive policing here and in other cities. And I think that the opinion of some of the academics was because it was done by academic researchers who were associated with the vendor, that it was not a pure research model. And what we were trying to do was, while we were implementing this in an experiment, in the initial experiment, to see if there was more accuracy in trying to predict crime using an analyst or using the algorithm. We tried our best in a real-world environment to do a clinical trial of that and to try to come up with the answer to the question, can the algorithm predict crime or forecast crime more accurately than our current practice? And that's why we did those initial studies.
And on the going back now to the page 3 of the department's response, the last paragraph there that speaks to the location-based programs. So the department is redesigning anchor points into a discussion of crime generator and crime attractor locations consistent with academic literature and so on. Can you explain that, what that is referring to? Both in terms of my ongoing question about understanding the status, so where it says the department is redesigning, so I understand that to be a work in progress,
Yes.
but tell me what the considerations are around that.
So it is a work in progress, because we had asked the divisions to come up with anchor points, is a term that we used. Where do you see crime being anchored in the community? And in fact, the literature, if you look back at it, it refers to it, and this is some 30 years old, refers to these crime generator and crime attractor locations. The chief had asked us to go back and say, you know, this is not something he wants the LAPD to come up with, but he wants it to be grounded in actual research. So when we did the research, we found those articles that seem to still be pertinent today to talk about the crime generator and crime attractor. And as part of our effort to standardize this throughout the department, then we can refer to that when we're doing the training for our officers in the field.
And again, the research on this is that it's not just a police presence that has a displacing effect, but it also goes to the role of our engagement with the victims or the locations themselves. There's a concept called crime reduction through environmental design. So the nature that was referenced of a liquor store that has its windows blocked through ads and displays may have operating practices that offenders find ripe for abuse, and will focus on and victimize those locations repeatedly. That it's not just a police presence there that we seek, but location-based strategies are what operating practices by that business can deter crime. It can improve their resilience. There was a reference talked about each year we'll have the auto show and various other activities at the LA Convention Center. Location-based strategies there include the fact that when there's an auto show or a large event there, that we find those gatherings of tens of thousands of automobiles to be sitting ducks, if you will. That offenders recognize that there's an event going on there, and they'll go and prey upon those automobiles. And that our efforts, not just in having a presence at that location, but working with that organizer, working with that parking lot attendant, and working with systems and controls there, can deter the instances of crime. So location-based strategies that are referenced here, we want to get away from using an anchor point because, again, the phraseology denote we saw had a negative impact, but we do want to get to we want to stick with the science that talks about the fact that there are generators, there are locations, there are behaviors and patterns that exist that are location-based. And how can we smartly work in articulating what those strategies are to prevent crime, but also to identify those who are using those locations to feed their habit, if you will, or preying upon those victims. And we need to identify those individuals and bring them to justice, as well as get them support and assistance.
So on the top, at the top of page 4, that references the transition, you're transitioning your efforts into developing a precision policing model to develop a framework that incorporates neighborhood policing, focus on victimization, accurately focusing efforts on location-based crime. And how does it speak to what you're doing and what can be done to avoid the undue or adverse impact on innocent people who are in or around those locations?
So let me first say that, and Chief Arcos, I welcome this bringing back to operations. I don't want to dominate this matter, but I'll quickly point out that as was asked earlier about our community policing engagement, we see our efforts with Community Safety Partnership, those programs of adding officers in areas not from an enforcement posture, but from a relationship posture of building and understanding the nature of those communities that are, in most instances, highly impacted by particularly violent crime. What are the underpinnings and how can we detangle that by our presence? What resources and other support and efforts can be brought in that are not necessarily police-led, but that by our presence we can improve the public's perception of our intent and desire to improve the safety of those communities and identify as problem solvers what are strategies that can improve the resilience of that area to its ability to combat and be resistant to seeing the focus of violence there. Additionally, the efforts of the department in the last 2 years of moving more than 600 personnel back to the field by downsizing specialized functions or eliminating those functions by reallocating resources to our area stations is an effort to build on neighborhood policing by having additional resources that are not simply going from call to call to call, but are going in neighborhoods to outreach and engage in the community to understand what are your pressing issues, how are we helping, how are we hurting. Lastly, all of this, though, depends on officers having accurate and timely information. In the absence of that, of a situational awareness of what are the characteristics of their neighborhood and what is the neighborhood enduring, what successes are they seeing, but what are their challenges, in the absence of that, we're simply going out there blind. But safe walks to schools, efforts that are engaging in those communities, we see those roll calls in the street, neighborhood watch programs, town hall meetings, forums and engagements. Those are all policing strategies.
Here's what I'm asking is, or what I'm trying to understand is, if you identify an area that warrants some particular presence activity to prevent crime, everybody in that area is not necessarily going to be a perpetrator of a crime. So what I'm asking is, what's embedded in the training, the discussion, the efforts underway to make sure that people who are otherwise innocent are not being and I don't mean simply falsely arrested. I'm thinking in terms of people who are going to have to deal with being in proximity to an potentially enhanced law enforcement presence.
So it goes to, and this can be I think it's an area that deserves a better, more detailed representation. But let me start by saying we hire people of great value, who have personal characteristics of emotional intelligence, who care and have a concern to make a difference and to recognize that they're serving in an honorable profession. We then go into training and guidance as to what tools, what constitutional rights are to be afforded, and how they go about policing and how sacred their responsibilities are. Then, as we train and we then go out and oversee and supervise and lead, and most recently with body-worn video and other audits and inspections, have an accountability loop that go back and look back and identify where and reinforce instances where officers get it right and are doing it exactly consistent with the model of procedural justice, of respecting the rights and dignity of everyone involved, and they're carrying out these values that are on these walls. But when we fall short, that we hold those individuals accountable, that we provide training, but also accountability for those that are not fulfilling. That whole system in a feedback loop is something that is inherent to policing with LAPD, I believe, our culture, and we're committed to continuing it as we move forward. And yet adding to it attributes that new technologies such as body-worn video and digital in-car video give us into the insight of what actually is occurring. That most recent report by the Inspector General of the 91 stops by gang officers, I think, was an example that the evolution of this craft now allows officers to both witness what they're doing, but also supervisors, command staff, and the public in this commission to validate or not, and when we find shortfalls, to take a corrective action. So that it's a whole system.
So,
Chief, before I move on to my last couple of questions, I'll put a finer point on this.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just wanted to make a point, though, Commissioner. With the Office of Operations now having direct oversight of running the program, and we've learned from the inconsistencies applied and the failures that were happening with Laser. Laser was not designed as a one-size-fits-all for 21 different areas across the city. Precision policing is much better designed to meet the needs, the unique needs of every area and every command. And in particular, the neighborhood policing component that's built into precision policing is much better designed as far as the accountability and effectiveness of how we go into these micro hotspots. And additionally, the micro hotspots can move. They can move daily. Where anchor points designed with Laser were designed for 6 months to a year, where we're constantly coming to these neighborhoods, to your point, again, where people were getting contacted. Micro hotspots can be there for one day. They can move another day. And that's, the versatility and the flexibility that's designed into precision policing that we will roll out, again, with a very directed consistency.
So my request on this particular issue, and again, I'm still on page 4. I'm at the end of that first paragraph under C, where it says that since data-driven strategies are still an emerging field, the development and implementation of new technologies will further refine their use and provide opportunities to obtain independent evaluations of the efficacy and impact of data-driven policing programs. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm reading this when the reference to the efficacy and impact, I'm reading that to mean the impact on, did you prevent crime? What are the crime statistics and those impact? What I'm asking specifically is that the very concept of impact also take into consideration the impact on innocent people in the communities. That's what I'm asking.
And that's exactly what I'm speaking to too as well. Adverse impact of people who are being disproportionately stopped in an area is not something that we are looking to design this program around. We are going to where the crime is being.
So I get that in the explanations, and what I'm asking again is to formalize so that the very notion of impact, when you're evaluating the impact of these programs, that you're not looking at it simply from the impact of from the law enforcement impact on crime, that you're also looking at it on the impact of the human impact, if you will, on people and communities.
I agree, and this commission has made it very clear to the department about that impact that we're having, again, from the data-driven policing programs, from AFDRs, and from procedural justice, and all that stuff is occurring right now. We are going back at it, again, with a very fervor to it, and training our supervisors and our officers and the command staff across the board to making sure, again, that is really well understood.
And Commissioner, we followed this discussion on this page with the community sentiment surveys that speak to this very issue. So I apologize if there's some tone of this report or our presentation that suggests that the measure of LAPD and this administration is the absence of crime at any cost. That is absolutely not the case. I'm proud of the men and women who go out each day, and as I'm sure you are, that do it, that are here to build trust in communities by their actions. That are not. And so this was paragraphed as a reporting and evaluation. The proximity of the survey that was talked about is understanding that we need to improve the sentiments of understanding the sentiment of each of the neighborhoods at the neighborhood level, to understand how our application of our strategies are actually building and reinforcing trust or undermining it. This is not an agency that's looking to do an Operation Hammer or return to the ghosts of our past, where we're simply oppressing and everything that moves is somehow an enemy or a criminal.
Appreciate that. And along those lines, on the list of the surveys and some of the things that you may be, some of the other tools you may be using, it seems to me that the effectiveness of some of these types of surveys, where you're going to do telephone surveys, internet surveys, online focus groups, and those things, the efficacy of those are going to vary tremendously based on the communities you're dealing with, and particularly considering that many people who are in some of the most impacted communities are not people who spend their days online surfing online and the like. So I'd appreciate some comment about what specific steps are going to be taken to make sure that these types of surveys and things are culturally relevant and really getting to the people that I would presume we're most concerned about, are innocent people who already have it difficult enough living in a difficult environment or community. So what specific kinds of steps are going to be taken to make sure that these are tailored in a way to capture that kind of impact or input?
So I think these are things that exist today, and again, I think to your point, again, they can be varied, again, from community to community where you're hitting, but these are the things that exist today that we can actually go to find some sort of measure of sentiment. In addition to those things, these are the things that are ongoing with this chief of police, with days of dialogue, the town halls, the forums where people who are invited to be out there and come and talk to the police. Those things are ongoing as well and can be used as a measure of sentiment of what's going on in our communities across the city.
And yet, as you know, this department was engaged in a survey. The last survey was approximately a year ago. And we have those measures, and we clearly see the differences between communities across the city. We recently were approved by the City Council for funding that will allow a multimodal, meaning a variety of survey instruments. There is no perfect one instrument. There's a conversation about Elucid here, but we recognize and we are committed to coming back to the Commission with the design model, if you will, that speaks to the differences across communities and across individuals, whether it be a cell phone or based or internet based or a door-to-door. We are the most recent, the transition to the new computer-aided dispatch system that will occur this summer, for instance, is going to give us the ability to do callbacks and textbacks to callers. So more than 3 million calls last year to LAPD. And we are looking forward to using a design of that allows us to reach back to people who call LAPD for a satisfaction survey. And we have no idea what we'll find. I'm sure we'll find various reactions. But how do we then start getting that data and start systematically looking at it so that we can understand what are strategies that we should do, that we can engage in to pursue focus groups? We are a customer service business, and our commitment is to identify a methodology that has multiple touch points. It won't be perfect. I suspect that there'll be others that'll be critical of it for one aspect or another, but we will work with this commission and look forward to this leadership and helping us design where is the sweet spot for that.
Okay, two last ones. One, Chief Arcos, as I understand it, you are, and you've alluded to a couple times as being kind of assuming the accountability for the programs. And one thing I'd like is some follow-up information is really just charted out in terms of how's the accountability lie from you all the way down to the street and from the street all the way up to you. So that'd be helpful to understand how that accountability is really going to work, not just on paper, but also in practice as well.
Well, I think the Office of Operations already is designed for that. We oversee the 4 geographic bureaus, and in each of the geographic bureaus oversee all of our 21 areas. So that will be the accountability mechanism going forward, is that the bureau chiefs will be responsible for ensuring the implementation of precision policing is happening accurately and consistently across their bureaus. And we'll be looking at that through the design of metrics and our own inspections from our back office under the direction of Commander Rodriguez and his cadre that will go out there. We'll also right now identifying a lieutenant that will be assigned to the Office of Operations that will be our point of contact, that will be on the CSOC calls in the morning, and then following up with the area CADs again to make sure that the precision policing policies are being followed at the area CAD levels.
So thank you very much. I guess the last question maybe then is for the chief. To respond or to indicate to me, again, from a high-level standpoint, and what I'm hearing is you have a program that's where there's been a number of issues identified. You have a lot of potential harm and impact on people who are, and I don't mean just somebody being offended. I'm talking potentially about people's constitutional rights being potentially implicated. Uncertain or dubious benefits of some of the programs. I'm not saying there's none. I'm saying that I don't know that, at least from the IG's report and the other information, that was not clear what the benefits have been. So and we're hearing that it's a lot of work in progress. That there's a lot of things that are steps that you're taking, which I think are well suited. But the question I think is there harm in suspending the programs until everybody's satisfied that they're in fact working? And just to clarify the question, now I'm not a law enforcement official, so I'm not saying you should not use data in carrying out the mission. What I'm asking is relative to any formalized programs that were the subject of the IG's report. If they're in flux and being worked on, why would we not just push the pause button until everybody's certain that all the issues have been resolved and everybody can be comfortable with it?
So Commissioner, perhaps I would benefit by understanding your first assertion, that was that the constitutional rights of individuals were impacted. Where and what aspect of the report did you see that?
No, I'm talking about, I said potentially implicated.
No, no, sir, I'm sorry. I'm asking, before I suspend efforts to go and police and provide for the public safety in a city of 4 million, we are relying upon strategies that go to the pragmatically that crime occurs in our city, that people are victimized, people die at the hands of others, and homes are invaded, and people lose valuables as well as their sense of security by people who are within our neighborhoods. And as a policing professional and as a law enforcement agency, the second largest in the country, we have to have a framework based on values and based upon strategies that, while imperfect and not always easily to be able to look back and articulate with data, deserves an investment of trust. That as we see shortfalls, specific shortfalls. And
If you want
specific-
this meeting to continue, we can have this discussion and we can have our vote. If you want to have public input, when you get up there, you can say whatever you want and there will be no interruption. If you're going to disrupt this meeting, I am going to recess this meeting and then bring it back where we don't have disruption. I'm asking you, please, you will have the respect and courtesy of everyone in the room when you're speaking, but so will the chief of police and so will the commissioners.
So specifically, I believe that the Inspector General identified with the chronic offender bulletin something that needed to be suspended and now walked away from. On Predpol, and to the extent that Laser identified place-based concentrations of violent crime in Laser circumstances and in Predpol property-based crime, I believe that, and we will are committed to providing not just the research, but the practical experience of that, understanding where those locations are and the description of how those locations exist, and understanding how interventions by the police and by others can change and lower crime. That's the tradecraft that we've been engaged in, and we'll continue. To suspend Predpol because it's a brand, to suspend Laser because it's a brand, I think is warranted in Laser's instance because materially, the aspect of the chronic offender bulletin we need to walk away from and go back to practices that we've engaged in the past. And on the location aspect of it, it's the corridors and so forth that are identified. We can deal with by still needing to identify locations where violent crime is concentrated and identifying the circumstances of how those are going about and what are our strategies to work in partnerships and a community engagement to interrupt and stop and reduce that. Predpol does not, to this point, have the, I have not found, and the organization has not found, absent its error in regards to police stations, that it, looking at a group of, I'll say, Devonshire area that has 50 square miles and 250,000 people, or 300,000 people, to take those 200 or 300 officers and to ignore and to treat every neighborhood the very same, is to ignore where patterns and series are occurring today, first where they were last week, first where they were the week before. We need a strategy that identifies that, that's data, that's based on data, that's based on officers' awareness and engagement with the community, that's based on community input. And we need strategies that then challenge our communities and challenge our commands to identify strategies that's going to be effective and then gauge that effectiveness and then restart it over again. That is the process that the organization has been engaged in. I'm committed as a chief going forward, but to suspend, if you will, Predpol because it's got a because of the doctor's work with UCLA or because of the background of it, I believe is to suspend location-based strategies. And I'm not, and we will continue to look at how it comes up with its boxes, but I want to stress to the organization, I need 10,000 men and women to also understand that as a chief and as this commission, that we seek for them to go out and identify problem and challenges in their communities, people who are being victimized, people who are being unfairly targeted, and that we expect them to not just be aware of that, but to take actions to try to stop that. And that requires a knowledgeable and informed workforce. And to abandon this because of critics that are in this room is
And
I believe,
just-
an overreaction.
Okay, and just to clarify that, I'm not suggesting to abandon location-based strategies, and that's not the feeling that I get. I think I've alluded to a couple of times, just that there's a general feeling that that there's a lot of work in progress, efforts being made, and it sounds like good adjustments that are being made. But it's almost like working on the car as you're driving down the freeway. Is what it starts to sound like. Is that
Our quality through continuous improvement requires that as an attribute. I think it's to be commended that an organization is continually learning, and so to look at that, I think we do need to look at if a program in practice is having serious and detrimental impacts on community safety. Then I don't believe in working on that in progress. I believe that we step away from that. I have not seen location-based strategies the organization is involved with, and I do look for specifics, whether by the Inspector General or anyone else, that we've unfairly targeted a location because of the instances or concentrations or the frequency in which those locations have been victimized by others.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Decker.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner and Commissioner Goldsmith, members of the subcommittee who I know have worked hard on these issues, to the Inspector General, to the members of the community, both who are attending today in March and in July. While I was not on the commission at that time, I did watch the entire video from, I believe it was July 24th. And I'd also like to thank the department very much for its work on this, for its openness, Chief, and receptiveness in making change. I do believe that is critical to the success of this department overall. My fellow commissioners have asked a lot of questions, many of which I was going to ask, and they went into areas I was not intending, but I'd like to sum up my question or concern in the following matter. Obviously, this commission, the department, has a great obligation to the people of the city to reduce crime, be a partner in reducing crime with the community, and to keep the community safe. But we have to use the resources of the department in a very smart and effective way, and do so in a manner that does not treat the residents of any community differently. The problem with the report is the lack of information to support that. And I do believe the information exists, but it's not provided in this report. Maybe it's or it hasn't been collected. Maybe it requires a little more detail to go into. Maybe it requires looking at the field investigation cards. Or maybe it requires finer detail. I'm convinced there is a way to establish this, to ensure the department's using its resources effectively, protecting the community, engaging the community, but it just hasn't been put together. And the way to build the trust, as you all know, is to establish that you are working together with the community and being effective and using the resources this city gives the department in a very effective manner. We don't have the data. I'm convinced it is there, that it can be obtained. It might be more challenging and difficult, but I would ask that the command staff, the chief, work with the subcommittee members to bring it all together for us, because the different programs you've highlighted, Chief, the different, crime data that is collected by the department, in addition perhaps to the field investigation cards that are now required to be kept, can collectively create a much better picture of what is going on. I think that's what the commission needs. I think that's what the community needs. Chief, did you want to respond to that?
No, thank you, Commissioner. And nothing is more important to us than reducing the fear of incidents and crime and building trust in our communities here in Los Angeles. So, I respect your remarks, and we'll go back at this again, and we'll be prepared to provide something in much greater detail on how this rollout looks like, how the accountability happens, and what the training looks like. We'll certainly come back and report back to the subcommittee on what that would be.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, let me just say, clearly here that the additional information that needs to be gathered or is gathered and that the commission or the subcommittee feels they need to see should be a part of these upcoming quarterly reports, not a hold on starting what we need to do. Okay, we'll take public comment now.
Yes, sir, we have 30 comment cards.
Okay.
The first three, Mr. Herman, Michael Novick, and Gina Viola.
Who's second? We don't have time to wait for people to.
Mr. Herman, Michael Novick,
Mr.
Gina
Novick,
Viola.
you're first. Go ahead, sir. Mr. Novick, go ahead, sir. Mr. Novick, do you want to start your time? Start the clock, please.
All right, so let's talk about what's actually going on here. It's great that they abolished the chronic offender program, since most people are not offenders, let alone chronic. But why are they fighting so hard for this place-based policing? And I'll tell you why. It's because there are people in this city who demand aggressive, suppressive policing. It's the people who want to turn Venice into Malibu, the people who want to turn downtown LA and Skid Row into San Francisco. It's the people who want to turn Crenshaw, to do to Crenshaw what they've done to Washington, D.C. and Harlem, which is turn them white. It's the people who want to, in areas of hot anti-colonial and class struggle like Boyle Heights and Highland Park, they want the police to displace not crime, but the people who live there now. Because they want to charge $3,000 or $3,500 for a one-bedroom apartment like they do in San Francisco. And that's what's going on. This is not about crime suppression. This is about transforming the city of Los Angeles into somebody's dream and somebody's nightmare. So let's talk about that reality. The reason they can't justify what they're doing and can't find the data to back it up is because it's not about data. They changed the name of this. They used to say it was data-driven, evidence-based policing, but identifying so-called chronic offenders is not about evidence. It's about what kind of city you want to live in and who's going to live in it. So the reason you have this outrage is not because these people have an axe to grind. These are the people who are suffering from aggressive, suppressive policing. They're from the communities that are being driven out of the city. You want to displace not crime. You want to displace these people to Palmdale and Barstow and Las Vegas because they can't live in Los Angeles anymore. And that's not the city I want to live in. But I think you represent a class of people who do.
Mr. Herman.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand that no public education follows through the issues of mental health under Penal Code 422, which is a criminal threat. See, criminalizing people in their community and asking them to leave immediately is a criminal threat in itself. And you continue to tell Mike Fuhr, that fucking racist attorney from the city, at 213-978-8100. If you call, you can make a claim under 91.5A, fuck the police. So I, just being a little UC rat and know about Robert Kane and his child molestation, I have mythologies too. Step one is A, you're wrong. Step B, you're still wrong. And in addition to that, not to do, as you said in quote, Mr. Soboroff, not to do. Yeah, data, fair, rational, and trust. Oh, I'm sorry. That was you, Mr. Michael Moore. Remember back in 2012 when you kicked me out of my community because you called me out on a penal code and retaliation, and now I'm fucking living in the street based on the conditions as the first speaker. You fucking assholes are son of a bitches, motherfuckers.
Off topic. This isn't about you.
This is
about
about
what the
no submission.
agenda.
No submission, because in the report, motherfuckers, in the
Next speaker, please. Next speaker.
The next speaker is Gina Viola.
Viola, sir. Next speaker, please. Who's the next speaker?
Gina Viola.
And then after
President, the
that,
speaker's disrupting the meeting, preventing the meeting
so you're
from
disrupting the
continuing.
meeting? Okay.
The next speaker is Gina Viola, followed by Jerry Dietrich, Zach Sherwin, and Tiff Guerra.
Okay. Sir, sir, what, do you have a card in, sir?
Since your report, you atrociously call an audit, failed to mention the harm that these programs have caused to the community, I'm going to cite some of that for you now. June of 2016, Gang Enforcement Division officers stopped a car in the 77th Street area laser zone as a person in the car was wearing a white Black Sox baseball cap on what the DA's report described as Hood Day. During the stop, the officer killed Keith Bursey, a 31-year-old black man, shooting him once in the chest and twice in the back. Later that year, October 2016, another officer was conducting pedestrian and vehicular code enforcement in a high crime area per crime suppression assignment in the 77th Street area. Officers passed a car containing 18-year-old black youth Carnell Snell Jr. and initiated a chase after he looked in their direction, appeared startled, and then leaned forward towards the front passenger seat. The officer shot Snell by shooting him in the back. Later still that same year, December of 2016, Metro officer was patrolling a known gang area in an unmarked car assigned to a crime suppression detail in the 77th Street area. Officers passed Ryan Joseph, a 20-year-old black man, and initiated a stop that ended when the officer killed Joseph by shooting him twice in the middle of his back. Now I ask you this. If any of those people killed were white, would you shut these programs down then? Because I think that you would. I definitely think that you would. Ugh. Chief, in response to your comments about preventing crime, you do not prevent crime. You just don't. You just can't. Only healthy communities can prevent crime. And you are keeping the community with your presence. Shut it down.
Jerry Dietrich, please.
Hi, my name is Jerry Dietrich. I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. When I entered the room today to declare my disdain for these programs, Predpol and Laser, but according to your agenda, you only are going to either approve the IG report, review the IG report, or approve the department's report. So I don't know. Anyhow, all the same, I just want to say, I want you to disband these expensive, ineffective, and unwelcome programs. As you have been told numerous times, no one in the LA community wants them to continue. I see I have some more time, so I'm going to comment on all these wonderful discussions I've heard today. The first thing, Chief Moore, your precision policing, I see this as something new in name only that will take the community another 2 years to disband and will be renamed something else that we don't want. And Commissioner Goldstein, I like some of your comments, and then one interesting, you said, since we have such limited info, and I agree with what Decker also said about the limited info. And I am certain that the goal of the LAPD is to keep the commission in the dark as well as the community. The more they talk about transparency, the less transparent they will be.
The next speaker is Zach Sherwin, followed by Tiff Guerra.
So I'll start by saying that the Inspector General very studiously avoided rendering any value judgment on the fact that over 99% of the responses had identical language. But just in case there is any insinuation that the fact that a lot of people cared to take the time to send an email, even if that email did have identical language, indicates that hundreds of people were involved in that. And you know, an even higher percentage of the language was identical in the remarks in support of these programs, which is 0. There was no language in any of them because they didn't exist. Chief Moore says that he wants programs that are fair and rational and that are going to build trust, recognize bias, identify community concerns. And then later you said this isn't doublespeak. Nobody even thought about doublespeak until you say, this isn't doublespeak. It's not a thing you say when you aren't practicing doublespeak. These are not the ways to achieve the goals you're articulating, Chief. These programs fill these areas with cops who are looking to racially profile folks who have already been criminalized despite not having done anything. Carnell Snell, who the previous speaker, Gina, mentioned, was seen looking suspiciously in a vehicle going in the opposite direction. It's not throwing out a baby with the bathwater. It's throwing out a turd with the bathwater. These programs don't deserve to be in existence. I'm sorry to lap into bathroom talk. Finally, in terms of building trust, Commissioner Soboroff, the snarling scorn and contempt that you display for the community members in the room, there's absolutely no chance that does anything towards building trust in here. Do you want to get this meeting started or not? To Michael Novick, when he's asking about a procedural question on how to comment on the agenda, I can't imagine what it's like to exist inside yourself. And finally, to say to Chief Arcos, but that information that we need, obviously that's in a quarterly report instead of keeping us from what we need to do. Clearly, your fellow commissioners do not necessarily agree with that opinion, and I don't think you should take it as
So we see how LAPD is posturing here as being this police force that is very responsive to public criticism, and how, now that they know the program isn't working, they are responding by shutting down those parts that don't work and looking for something different and better. But let's be clear that predictive policing and Operation Laser has been researched and explored within LAPD for over 10 years now. And what we know from your internal documents is that LAPD had copious reports regarding Operation Laser and how it was working and what was going on with it. There were daily, weekly, monthly, annual reports, hundreds of them. The issue isn't that the program wasn't being tracked and monitored. The issue is that LAPD was tracking the program and they were just fine with how it was operating. And we understand why if we listen to a recent interview with Bill Bratton, who was the ex-chief here who implemented broken windows policing and predictive policing, and who was the person who began precision policing, which is what they are trying to move into next. And in this interview, we hear Bratton get complimented on what is referred to as his success here in LA, and specifically what is referred to as how the downtown area has come back and is very prosperous now. And this is referred to as a positive effect of policing. And it struck me when listening to this that they are confirming something that we already know, and that is that with policing and these programs, the goal is not to actually reduce crime or to make communities more safe. The goal is redevelopment, and the goal is profit, and the goal is moving people out of their homes. And in moving families that live in those areas now out of their homes, that's what these programs do. That's what they allow LAPD and the city to do. And that's why the LAPD is okay with the programs working the way they are, because it was never a tool of crime reduction. It's a tool of displacement and of criminalization. And while you are focusing on taking away areas and property, it's the people that live there that you are harming. And we're not hearing any of you talking about that. You're harming families, you're harming communities, and we demand that you shut this shit down. We don't want your precision policing, we don't want your predictive policing, we don't.
Next speaker, please.
The next three speakers, please. Akil Gopal, Mimi Stoltisic, and Josh Mayer.
Morning.
We've been hearing a lot today about how predictive policing that's place-based or location-based is benign, and I want to talk against that. First of all, there's no such thing as place-based or location-based predictive policing. You're still targeting people in those places. Secondly, it's based off of crime data, which is based off of decades of racial profiling. Crime data is inherently racist. And place is also racist because here in LA, it's been violently segregated for generations. The hotspots you gave us also showed that with PredPol, you're effectively creating a quarantine around Skid Row by creating a constant presence of dense hotspots, which we've mapped based on, by the way, like around 1/8 of what we asked for in legally required PRAs. So finally, what I would want to say is about all of this, you're offering us little ways to tinker with it and optimize with it. And what we're trying to say is that the very fundamental question you're asking, which is, who are the people that we're going to deem as suspicious? Where are the places that we want to apply violence? These are not questions that we want answered, no matter what the answer is. So what we want to say is no amount of tinkering and optimizing will give us an answer that we'll be satisfied with, because at the basis of this is a colonial question of how to best suppress a colonized population. And we know this because Brantingham himself created this work based off studying insurgencies in US-occupied Iraq and Afghanistan. So what we know is that what you're trying to do right here is apply the same exact tactics to dispossessed and deprived communities here in LA to manage violence and to apply violence yourselves instead of fighting against violence the way you're saying. So what we want and what we demand is, in addition to shutting this shit down, we want reparations for all the people harmed. And we know that if all of you still have jobs afterwards and if this department still exists, then the reparations were not large enough.
Next three.
My name's Mimi. I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. The first thing I wanted to say is framing the community feedback as concerns is really disingenuous. What the community did was completely reject the program. These aren't concerns, they're rejecting the programs. Also, it's rather remarkable. You had 819 responses and not one spoke out in favor of these programs. The community is completely unified in its opposition to the programs. You also got to know that many of these people are people who are concerned about giving their info to when they signed this, because they don't trust you, they don't trust the LAPD, yet they did it. And if you aren't going to listen to those people, to the community who expressed their opposition, you'd have a lot more integrity if you just say fuck you to the community, because that's what you're doing. So for once in your fucking lives, would you listen to the community and shut it down?
Shut it down!
Next speaker, please.
Josh Mayer, followed by Charlotte Neary Bremer, Akua again, and Jeremy Levinson.
Thank you. My name is Josh Mayer. I'm a PhD student in anthropology at UCLA, and I'm here as one of the signatories to the letter that Commissioner Bonner mentioned, which is designed to dispel the idea frequently mentioned by Chief Moore that there is widespread academic support for these programs that are being discussed today. And so I'd like to read briefly from that letter. To the extent that Professor Jeffrey Brantingham and his UCLA colleagues represent an academic stamp of approval of predictive policing and other algorithm-based methods for Chief Moore, we wish to make it very clear there is not universal agreement or acceptance of the empirical merit and the ethics of their research at UCLA in anthropology as a discipline or in other disciplines. On the contrary, many anthropologists and other scholars who read his scholarship believe it represents some of the most troubling legacies of the discipline of anthropology and of social science more generally. Among our concerns, which we can share in more detail, are first, whether the research meets the ethical obligation outlined in our anthropological code of ethics to ensure our research does not harm our research subjects, and second, how the quantitative approach of the research naturalizes policies and practices that have had disparate impacts on Black and brown communities. If this police commission is interested in the position of the Academy and UCLA anthropology in particular on predpol and predictive policing, we say plainly and adamantly this research does not have our universal support. And I think it's clear from the comments today from Chief Moore and Deputy Chief Malinowski that there's just a fundamental misunderstanding about what this letter is speaking about. It's not about monetizing these products. That does raise issues of conflicts of interest within the university and by Professor Brantingham when he's evaluating his own programs, which clearly he cannot be doing in an unbiased way. But it's also about the ethics of the research, as the letter says. It's about grave methodological problems that naturalize racist practices and the data that result from those practices. And it's about, and as I said, it's about these conflicts of interest. We've seen at Ohio State University and Duke massive conflicts of interest where university administrations have overlooked bad data in order to earn money for the university.
Thank you, sir.
I'm Charlotte. I'm a graduate student at UCLA as well. As Josh said, it's not just the conflict of interest of the person who's producing the product, also evaluating the product. There are many other academic concerns about predictive policing, or location-based policing, or precision policing. Cathy O'Neill, who is a Harvard-trained mathematician, data scientist, and has worked as a professor and hedge fund analyst, provided this statement. Provision policing is stipulated on the assumption that we have crime data. We don't. Instead, we have arrest data and reported crime data, both of which are poor proxies for crime. Most crimes are not reported, and most crimes do not lead to an arrest. So we are working with a massively flawed data set with a lot of missing data. And that missing data is not equally distributed. For drug crimes, certain profiled people in neighbourhoods, specifically poor black neighbourhoods, are much more likely to be scrutinised for criminal behaviour and thus more likely to end up arrested. The algorithms, of course, don't know about the missing data. They are going with incomplete data, thinking it's a perfect representation of crime. And in particular, they look for hotspots for crime and send police to places that produce crime, i.e. arrests, which then predict and produce more crime. When you consider unequal missing data problem, we see a feedback loop. The places that have data get more data, and the places that have missing data will continue to miss data because the police are not sent there. So as you can see, there is not wholehearted scientific stamp of approval on this type of policing practice. And there's a huge debate going on in academia, which I don't think has been fully reviewed by the team who provided you with the information earlier.
Wow. Thank you.
Shut it down!
Morning.
My name is Akuya Ajin, and I am also a graduate student at UCLA. Today I'll be reading comments by Professors Jeffrey Fagan and Bernard Harcourt of Columbia University. There's deep academic criticism of the quote-unquote PredPol, predictive policing software that the LAPD is considering. Rather than predict crime, these tools predict policing, instantiating its errors and biases of the most heavily policed communities. As such, PredPol replicates rather than corrects for racial inequalities and inefficiencies of policing. Tools like PredPol, in essence, multiply patterns of policing errors and biases while offering only minimal gains for public safety. It is nearly impossible to scrub race from predicted analytics given its dependence on historically biased data. The recent detailed audit by LAPD Inspector General Smith sounds an alarm about the negative effects of predictive policing on crime reporting at police stations and at the edges of crime zones, further weakening the public safety returns from policing. These authors detail many of their concerns about predictive policing in their research. Thank you.
Thank you. Morning.
Good morning. My name is Jeremy Levinson. I'm another PhD student from UCLA. I'm here to read portions of a 5-page testimony that was submitted last night by Sunita Patel, Curtis Skinner, and Alicia Virani, all from the UCLA School of Law. Sunita Patel is an assistant professor of law and faculty director of the Veteran Legal Clinic, and she teaches civil rights and police litigation. So their testimony reflects their views and not any position on behalf of the entire school. So they write, we respectfully submit the following testimony regarding predictive policing in Los Angeles. The LAPD uses 2 types of place-based predictive policing, which we find deeply unsettling and worth halting. PredPol and the Los Angeles and Laser, these programs use prior crime and arrest data by geographic area to provide officers with heat maps or hotspots. Police departments make patrol decisions based on such data. PredPol focuses on vehicle-related crimes while Laser focuses on gun-related crimes. Our testimony primarily raises 3 concerns. A, PredPol and Laser are math-washed or tech-washed racial profiling. B, flawed data should not be used as a basis to predict criminal activity. And C, predictive policing runs against the general trend in Los Angeles County of non-punitive approaches to crime prevention and the general acceptance that individuals can and do rehabilitate. I'm skipping to their conclusion. Given the strong concerns raised by the public, the Officer of Inspector General, and others, we counsel the Commission to eliminate the use of PredPol and study the consequences of eliminating Operation Laser. With the many law enforcement investigative tools available to the LAPD, it should abandon ones lacking public support and criticize for sweeping countless individuals into harmful policing dragnets. The Commission's role is one of oversight. The Commission can no longer ignore the pressing concerns that new era predictive policing only reinforces the same sorts of racially biased policing that have plagued Black and Latinx communities since the dawn of modern policing. Thank you.
Thank you. The next three speakers, Jessica Catalina, Dr. Jemima Pierre, and Jody Schofield.
Morning.
Hi, good morning. My name is Dr. Jessica Catalino, and I'm Associate Professor of Anthropology at UCLA. I've published on policing, and today I come here to speak as a scholar and a citizen. In 2016, several UCLA anthropologists co-organized an international symposium on racialized state violence in global perspective. We heard from experts and about persistent patterns of racialized state violence in societies that include our own. At that event and beyond, one thing is clear as a bell. There is no academic consensus in favor of predictive policing. Indeed, there's extensive criticism in the scholarly literature, in law, mathematics, and social sciences, for example. Criticism for reasons that include the tendency of predictive policing to harden the biases that characterize not only policing, but our other institutions in our society, and indeed to expand those biases through, for example, increased arrests. This morning, the academic literature has been invoked, but the scope of literature that's been cited is inadequate. And even the study by the National Academy of Sciences that was mentioned expresses concern in its very title of its own press release that, quote, there is insufficient evidence on the role of racial bias, end quote. The chair of that study said, quote, the committee felt that the lack of data on the role of racial bias in proactive policing was startling, and that it's critically important that we understand not simply the impacts of proactive policing on racial outcomes, but also how race may impact the adoption of specific types of proactive policing, end quote. I refer you to the Inspector General report, page 26, which cites two published studies that evaluate predictive policing. Please see footnote number 36, which lists the titles of these publications and the journals in which they were published, but not the author. The author of those published studies that evaluate PredPol was my colleague Jeff Brantingham, who is also chief of R&D at PredPol. I welcome the application of scholars' research to pressing social issues, but it shouldn't be.
Thank you. Is this letter available? Is this letter available on the website? Or I mean, you distribute it to us. We'll put it out. But are you going to put it out on your website for people here who haven't been able to see it? Go ahead.
It's going to be on the website, on the Medium page. So let's move on.
Okay. Okay.
My name is Dr. Jemima Pierre, and I am an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology and the Department of African American Studies at UCLA. I'm here to express my concern about the LAPD's intentions to deploy predictive policing technologies. One of the claims is that the deployment of PredPol is that its positive effects are consistent with academic literature. I would like to challenge this claim by saying what is more consistent with the academic literature is how significant race is for the U.S. and how it shapes where we live, where we go to school, how much we are policed or how we are not policed. I'd like to make three specific points concerning about PredPol concerning race, ethics, and profits. First, regarding race, PredPol is said to depend on historic crime data. However, what constitutes crime? How would PredPol determine white-collar violence or domestic violence? How is it that this crime always seemed to point to communities living in racially segregated and over-policed micro-hotspots? Second, regarding ethics, how is it that the city is willing to dispense funds towards private venture by a UCLA professor that ends up increasing police presence in over-policed Black and brown communities when members of these Black and brown communities are underrepresented at UCLA? This is an ethical question. Where academic knowledge by a UCLA professor targets a community that cannot access UCLA? Third, regarding profits, PredPol is a for-profit company whose raw material is poor Black and brown people. We are not just talking about surveillance, we are talking about extraction and dividends paid to a white scholar and a white company from the transformation of Black and brown communities into data for profit. PredPol's activities are based in racist assumptions about crime and communities of color, unethical and immoral treatment of members of the LA community, and finally, white profits from Black and brown bodies. It's a predatory policing program that should be dismissed and disbanded. Thank you.
morning. I've stood here many times and listened to you guys for the last 3 years, particularly Mr. Soberhoff. You guys are talking about building trust with the community. How can we trust you if you're killing us? I am a student at UCLA. I'm a graduate student. I'm a PhD looking into social welfare. One of my jobs is to go into Twin Towers and look at the results of what you guys are doing. It's ridiculous. Predictive policing needs to be shut down. We can predict policing as it stands. Policing is predictable in that it will kill Black and brown communities, members of these communities. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. Shut it down. Shut it down. Shut it down.
The next three speakers, please. Courtney Eccles, Hamid Khan, and Jamie Garcia.
So I'm with the Stop LAPD Spine Coalition, and I'm also a PhD student in criminology, law, and society at UC Irvine. And I just want to address a few things regarding the science on these programs, since Moore loves to tout research and academic literature. Let me stress a point that others alluded to earlier. The only two known empirical studies assessing predictive policing, where the researcher was not monetarily invested in a particular outcome of the study, found that predictive policing programs increased enforcement, but actually had little impact on the reduction of crime. And then regarding precision policing, just a few things that the LAPD won't tell you, and the reason why Moore could not answer the question regarding the academic literature on precision policing is because there is no academic literature on precision policing, and there is no scientific independent evidence supporting this strategy. And in fact, to this point, precision policing was created by Bill Bratton and first implemented during his stint as NYPD police commissioner in 2014. And he was also the former chief of police of LAPD and is now working with the LAPD to implement it here. One, that's what criminologists would refer to as a conflict of interest. Second, precision policing emerged in New York City in response to the Black Lives Matter demonstrations around the murder of Eric Garner. Third, it emphasizes even more data collection and surveillance and under the guise of community policing. Four, according to the NAACP, who, by the way, filed a lawsuit in New York around precision policing, and I quote, disguised as precision policing, the NYPD executes military-style gang takedowns that target low-income communities of color across New York City. Prior to executing these mass arrests, the NYPD conducts criminal investigations relying in part on a secret database that designates thousands of New Yorkers as members of gangs or local street crews with limited due process protections. 99% of the individuals in the NYPD's gang database are people of color, end quote. Sounds a whole hell of a lot like the...
Next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Hamid Khan.
Mr. Khan. Thank you. Thank you. You can, you're disrupting the meeting? It's your last warning. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting, or I'm going to recess the meeting. Are you going to leave, or are we going to recess?
The next speaker, Hamid Khan, followed by Jamie Garcia and
So a lot has been already said, so let's talk about the spin.
Yeah, she needs to leave the meeting. I've asked her to leave the meeting, so she's going to leave the meeting.
Wow, you really have a problem.
I gave her every warning. Go ahead.
Wait, what? Someone does need to walk her out.
Shut down the police department.
It's on camera, y'all. It's on local news. That's right. It's on the local news.
Okay, next speaker, please. You want to start the clock?
So a lot has been said, and of course, if they have even this much of shame, they will shut it down. But of course, they're shameless. We know where they come from. But let's talk about how the meeting started off with this guy, Mr. Frankenstein himself, Mark Smith. He starts casting a doubt and making a mockery about people's response. I wonder when people get things on ballot and they come from the same source and they gather signatures, if he'll have the audacity to tell the state assembly that fuck, it's coming from the same source, it's identical. I wonder when people sign petitions and get thousands of signatures coming from the same source, if he'll have the fucking audacity to come back and say this is identical. But it's only when people are speaking out about this motherfucking department that this asshole has to come back and say it's coming from the identical sources. Shame on you. Shame on you for doing that. Then let's go to what the chief has been saying about how you sanitize all this bullshit that we talk about. It's always evolving. This fucking place has been evolving since 1869. For the last 150 years, this goddamn department has been evolving. It was evolving, and this guy, Arcos, talks about much better design. Weed and Seed was a much better design. Operation Hammer was a much better design. Broken Windows was much better design. Suspicious activity reporting was much better design. Predictive policing is much better design. That's their fucking design that they talk about. But they don't have the audacity to seek the truth. You're not going to stay on this commission, we're telling you, Dale Bonner. They're going to kick your ass out. Because you're asking questions. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to be a rubber stamping body. You're supposed to be a rubber stamping body. But if you have any shame, what all of the academics, all of the folks have said is that this is fundamentally flawed by design. You can twist it, you can give it a different name, you can do whatever, it'll still bring up the same results. It's still going to quarantine black and brown bodies, it's still about land, it's about expropriating bodies, it's about displacing people.
Next speaker, please.
The next speaker, Jamie Garcia. Followed by Clint Blakely, Kai Utsumi, and Elizabeth Parks Kibbe.
So let's take it back to 2016, Gladys and 6th at LA Can, where folks like Craig, Eddie H., Lydia Trejo, Kay Utsumi, where we sat together and we said, predictive policing. So this is the new spin. But this isn't just about predictive policing. Well, one thing I want to step back is that that group of people, we built this power. We built this power to challenge you all. We built this power to show you all what the hell was going on. But this isn't just about predictive policing. This isn't just about shutting down predictive policing. This is about shutting down policing. And more, you raised the question, and I saw that. You wanted to legitimize your presence in the community. You want to legitimize that you are the one that provides safety. And what you're realizing right now and what we're seeing is that you're realizing that that legitimacy is crumbling. It's crumbling. And people are asking different questions. People are imagining different things. And we have academics here, we have, countless other people here that are giving you facts about predictive policing. But again, it's not just about predictive policing, because when we shut it down, and we do shut down predictive policing, we will not be shut down. We will be here the next day after the next day until policing nationwide, countrywide is shut down. We don't want policing anymore. And then you wanted pragmatic solutions. You wanted rational solutions, because apparently we are all here and we're irrational because we're challenging policing, because this is about policing. Rational solutions, they're right here. We have them all. More hospitals, more schools, more housing, more food. Those are the things that we want. And those are the things that you protect. We talked about real estate. We talked about land. Those are the things that you protect. We don't want those things protected anymore. We want
The next speaker, please,
speaker,
Clint
please.
Blakely.
your legitimacy is being questioned. This is about policing.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Please, you can, please stop. You can come back on another public comment. Yes,
All right.
let's start the clock again, my mistake.
All right. So I want to ask a question to the commission about a packet that was not available back there. We've heard a lot about the 819 emails that the commission received in the past 2 weeks, not one of which expressed support for data-driven policing. Why was that packet, which was posted online, not available in physical form back there? No reason? Okay. Well, I mean, that was we had a 26-page packet that was the Inspector General's report from March 8th. We've all already read that. So I think this other one would have been more important. And but I don't find it surprising that you didn't include it because it was a searing indictment of racist LAPD practices. So I'm calling you to include all the literature in physical form back there. All right. When a policy is rotten at its core, no amount of amendments or reform can set it straight. The laser and PredPol programs are rotten at their core. They are symptoms of white supremacy and will only result in the intimidation, incarceration, and murder of black and brown folks. These programs are not supported by academic research, as we've heard, and their racial bias will not be removed by reform. You can reduce the area of these hotspots, make them micro hotspots, but they will still be located in over-policed black and brown neighborhoods and will not change the over-policing of these neighborhoods. To use Chief Moore's words, I want to call on you all to absolutely throw the baby out with the bathwater if it is a racist, rotten, and murderous baby. End PredPol, end laser, shut it down.
Predictive policing, laser is flawed from the beginning. Shut it down. Why? Because it was conceived and promoted and put into effect by the LAPD itself without outside community input. So it's all authoritarian LAPD that goes back to like the man said, it goes back to the 1800s. But in my limited knowledge, I only know about the racist Chief Parker. Chief Parker was a white supremacist racist to the core that they named his police station after. And then Daryl Gates, the racist, and this LAPD still has a whole lot, it retains a lot of that racism. That racism resulted in a lot of protests. Also, the Watts Rebellion, 1968, okay? It was a rebellion against the LAPD and other things, like white supremacists and looking down at poor black and white people. And the LA Rebellion of 1992 also was a racist, against racist policing, and that policing still continues. I have talked to black women who told me how the police treated blacks during all in the occupation, and that kind of treatment still continues today. Shut it down. Shut it down.
Elizabeth Parks Kibbe, followed by Paula Miner, Tina Krenko, and General Jeff.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Parks Kibbe. I'm a lifelong Los Angeles resident. I am here because I care about the people of Los Angeles. I care about the police of Los Angeles, and I care enough to shut this down. I cannot speak to what it means to be part of a black and brown community that is systemically criminalized. What I can speak of is my own experience. I've tried lifting up data from other points, and it's usually unsuccessful in these forums, so I'll try a different tack. I went to private school in Los Angeles. I was the victim of many crimes that went underreported, not unreported, but underreported and absolutely unpoliced. Chief Moore, are you listening? I went on after NYU to become a civilian investigator for the Civilian Complaint Review Board in New York. I care very much about policing, and I see the necessity for it in our communities. I then became a public educator, a mother, and a local Los Angeles business owner in that order. I have even personal ties to people on this commission for whom I have compassion. because I know what it means to be a bureaucrat who is challenged by systems that were designed to hurt people and are difficult to reform. I would like to answer, well, there's several points that I would like to make. First of all, I drove over an hour to be here today. I suggest to many of you in this crowd, policemen, officers, chief, commissioners, and members of the public, to listen to the academics and also a podcast, which is easier to digest than a dissertation, sir, by a podcast called Data Skeptic. The date is June 23rd, 2016. It features Christian Loom, who is the lead statistician of
Next speaker, you can come back during public comment. We have more public comment, and you can fill out a card and then come back and then complete. Thank you.
I'll send a letter.
Okay.
I hope you appreciate the fact that we did have comments today from the academic community, because we know the commission, particularly Mr. Soboroff, demeans the group of people that come every week, demeans Stop LAPD Spying, that does research, that does work, that has said most of what's been said today for years, absolutely for years. The words that we hear today are words that are associated with LAPD: a flawed system, racial bias, lack of transparency. You know, Black Lives Matter comes here and uses those same terms when we're talking about officer-involved shootings. But these terms also are applied when we talk about policing, whether smart policing, predictive policing, or what the young lady said, predatory policing. I hope this commission listens. It's so important. From Black Lives Matter perspective, we think PredPol should be stopped. We know how it ends up. We know who is mostly suffering from these efforts. We know where those hot spots are. When I looked at one of the recommendations that Chief Moore made about if people call 911, then after their call, someone will call and try to present them with a survey to talk about how did you like what happened. Give us your comments on what happened. When a person calls 911, you know that is absolutely the very last thing they want to do. You know that they are extremely desperate and do not want to be surveyed to find out if your predicting policing policy was good or bad. So again, I join with my colleagues, I join with academia to say shut it down. We know what happens. The next step will be adding more to officer-involved shootings like
Come back during public comment. Jeff?
Hi, my name is Tina. I just wanted to draw our attention one more time to the OIG report because I think the language of it is really important. Specifically, the motives behind laser and the choice of the word laser as the title of the program. The basic premise, this is page 4 of the OIG report. The basic premise is to target with laser-like precision the violent repeat offenders and gang members who commit crimes in the specific target areas. The program is analogous to laser surgery, where a trained medical doctor uses modern technology to remove tumors and improve eyesight. Later on it says, plans are then developed to remove offenders from the area with minimal invasiveness and minimal harm to the people and the areas around them. This is a mandate for murder, and let me explain why. Chief Moore, you mentioned earlier that you have an interest in building, quote, a relationship building posture with the community. And when you create a program and sustain a program, divesting public funds away from education, away from affordable housing, away from programs that people actually need, you create a situation in which you arm already nervous officers. And I'm looking at the officers who are lining this room. People who are already have their heart rates up because they're confronting situations that are already high stakes. And you give them financially biased, unsubstantiable pseudoscience to justify violent interventions in communities of color. And these interventions result in the murder of community members like Roshario Mack, who needed help and healing and not a salvo of bullets, which is what he ultimately got. So I don't understand how any of you can sit there comfortably knowing that the consequence of a program like this is a bullet hitting someone's body. People's lives are at stake here. We're not just talking about watching people. We're talking about
Good morning. My name is General Jeff, Skid Row and Crenshaw District. Bonner better. As far as another presentation. Last time it was some inexperienced representatives, and now you've got LAPD brass. It's still the same thing. It's extremely vague. There's no depth. There's no substance. It's just we're pretending like it's something new. LAPD, this is not nothing new. LAPD's been using data for decades. Let's take, for instance, in the 80s. Everybody remember the Batarang? That was when it was crack houses and dope houses all throughout the hood. And LAPD, identified, located, and, generated all the data and then ran the Batarang up into people's houses, sometimes the wrong houses. But it was data back then. So it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff here. 2 + 2 is 4. And all this report is saying we're going to substitute the first 2 with the second 2. And then we're going to switch the second 2 with the first 2. All we're saying is it's still 2 + 2 is 4. It's still the same fucking math. There's not nothing new. What the hell are y'all presenting to the people to try to justify it? There's absolutely nothing there. And so, we appreciate the fact that the new commissioners are demanding more information from the department, because they're not just going to sign off on something that's basically just going to put bullseyes on the backs of blacks and brown kids and families all throughout this city. When we look at, when they talk about location-based policing, I'm concerned. I'm a Skid Row community activist. Are you saying location because Skid Row is going to be policed different from the San Fernando Valley, is going to be policed different from South Central Los Angeles? What does that even mean? When you talk about precision, what precision are you talking about? Because with 4 million people in this city and 10,000 officers, the core principle of LAPD has always been uphold the law through intimidation and fear tactics. So how in the hell are you going to focus on terms of talking about building trust through public safety when you intimidating and fearing people, causing trauma? It doesn't work.
The next 3 speakers, please. George Bazzetti, Erica Ferriston, and Ian Jameson.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So we're supposed to have law enforcement here, huh? So yesterday I go up online, and for the first time your agenda's missing, Soboroff. L idiots, L lawbreakers. Are you familiar with AB 2257, all you idiots, so-called lawbreakers? And Orwellian, opposite of protect to serve, reverence for the law, quality, respect, service, and integrity? This is an illegal meeting! And to make sure you know that, I have my official letter here, so all of you know that they have to respond in 30 days.
Mr. President, the speaker's off topic.
What happens here is out of order.
Let's go on topic, please.
This is on topic. This is your OIG who's supposed to pay attention to this stuff, dummy. Don't you follow the law, OIG? Are you sober off? Because your secretary yesterday told me all I got to do is put it out there.
Mr. President, the speaker's
and
off
Mr.
topic.
Herman went
Next
checking
speaker,
there's
please.
only 3
Sir, you're
copies. Shut up.
disrupting the meeting. Please
I'm
stop.
not disrupting the meeting. Okay, I'll sit down. Now you can't throw me out, fool. And here's the shit to prove it.
Erica Ferriston, please.
That's what you drive people to do, Fang.
Hi, my name is Erica Ferriston. This is my first time at a police commission hearing. I think you can probably gather, since I'm coming from the community, I'm going to have the same line as every single other member in this community has had, which is basically shut it down. I come from the west side, from Brentwood. I think if you look out, you'll see you've got young people, old people, students, white people, black people, brown people. We are the community. And I love all these quotes up here. And it says, in service to our communities. I'm telling you, as a representative from the west side, we want this shut down. While there are claims that this is unbiased, precision policing is just the latest iteration of historical racist policing tactics that seek to control, contain, incarcerate, and displace people. Yeah. And I'll speak for myself, I really appreciate you, Mr. Bonner, for all the questions that you've asked. I really think that you are sitting here and listening, and I hope that all of you are really listening to the community that we are supposed to be serving here. We don't want this. And I also invite, every Wednesday for over a year, people in this community have been gathering and forming a circle in support for the family members whose children, whose loved ones have been killed by law enforcement. You don't need papers and studies. Over 512 people in 5 years have been killed by law enforcement in Los Angeles County. This isn't working. Please continue to do the work to investigate on your own the truth and shut it down.
So the UCLA academics have done a masterful job of dispelling the myth that anyone in academia thinks that predictive policing works. I would just like to make a general statement about the state of policing in 2019 and the use of data. Prior to last year, with the passage of SB 1421 and AB 748, which allowed Californians to access law enforcement officer personnel records and to get body cam footage of critical incidents released within 45 days of the critical incidents. We didn't have access to any of that. We do not have a national registry for people who are killed by law enforcement, which is why we get those statistics aggregated by newspapers like The Guardian. I just want to repeat, our federal government does not require law enforcement agencies to report how many people they kill. So you guys have this mountain of data on us based on racial profiling and based on over-enforcement of low-level offenses. You have all of that data with which to police us to death, literally to death, and we don't know shit about you. And it should be the other way around, because you menace our constitutional rights and you have the power to kill us. So we are going to continue to demand transparency, and we are going to continue to demand that you shut down this wholly ineffective, universally reviled, fucking awful program. Shut it down.
Shut it down. The next speaker, Reverend, followed by Jonathan Foster and Reverend Dr. Mello Josiah.
Oh, there's another preacher in the building. That's always good to know. Quickly, there were two violent acts, I think, that happened. I don't have to go over all the facts. I'm glad the facts are already talked about. But I want to talk about the violent acts that happened. One, Soboroff, your racist ass, hurt this person talking to you about his own mental health journey. He was telling you his own mental health journey. And you missed it. You know how hard it is for someone traveling and suffering with mental health to stand anywhere to talk to anybody? And you would do that to him? And you want to give more resources to police to interact with these type of communities? You missed it. The second violent act is Bonner. They're going to come for you. You are black, and I think you realize you are black situated in white liberalism. Yeah. I think you saw that, and I think it scared you. When the chief busted his shoulders up in front of you, you weren't a black liberal anymore. Be careful. This white lady sitting next to you have the audacity in front of cameras. Tell them, go find facts. Go write up facts. Something's gotta, substantiate this. Go make it up. That's a former prosecutor.
That's the way it is.
Effortlessly. Take that and go fuck yourselves with it.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Foster. I acknowledge the 98% excellent service and 2% that's gross, and that's about all we can talk about is what's gross. And so the old chronic offender program was the spiral notebook. Remember they took that out and two officers would talk about what they had written down? That's still got problems. Where is the possibility for a person to grow and change, and where is the forgiveness in a repeat offender if they're getting constantly beat down by the cops? However, the improper use of a repeat offender program has every problem you've been cracked for. A public service done in private. To know things about the public, the citizen has to sue. They have to spend money and enrich a judge who gets 90% of his salary in retirement to find out information that should be all public, or to in programs that you or I or us would think and feel that the police wouldn't want anything to do with. Without a lawsuit, we're going to continue with programs. They were going to continue with these programs without a lawsuit, are detracting from the value of police, what they can be, what their role truly is. These programs have harmed potential public trust and the good name of the LAPD. Goldsmith, got your head down about the root causes of crime is right next to you, the dude that doesn't pay anybody. People subscribing to someone else a low wage, and then people are left with less than they need. And then hitting children throughout their life and speaking belittlement to the child also causes some people to be involved in crime. And Jesus, that would be a great thing, is taking Jesus out of here is the root cause of crime. A Goldsmith, you wouldn't know anything about that. So making people in the United States of America pay for a temple in Israel so they can chop off a...
Next speaker, please.
Greetings. My name is Reverend Dr. Mello Desire, and born and raised in Watts, but more importantly, dealing with the disenfranchised. They said enough already. I'm not going to repeat how predictive programming sucks. They've been telling us that we've been 11% of the population, but 54% of the crimes. And who are the ones that do the statistics? Are humans. So when you keep feeding data and you don't have any foundation for that data, it's the same Census Bureau people who also smoke weed and knock on the doors, and when they're tired, they miss about 1 million black people for the census. This is 2010, and now we're in 2019, so we're still supposed to believe the same data. Our goal is to work with the department and to help improve communication between relationships, work towards changing the culture and dialogue between LAPD and the inner city. We want to know about your new programs and your goals for the department, as well as how helping to stop gang violence, help you help our kids. The last thing you said, Soberoff, is that you want to help. So Ermias Ashtagon, who was our leader, who was everything to us, who did things that Mark Ridley Thomas and Garcetti, who stood behind you with crocodile tears, saying how saddened we are of his death, but they did not put our tax money where it's supposed to be. He took his $1 million and he was too strong. He didn't sign a deal, so he was too strong without government help, so you had to take him out. So you hired Eric Holder to take him out. I just want to work with you, Soberoff, to complete what you said in the press release April 3rd. If you're really about gang violence, then the emails that Mark Ridley Thomas and his pit bull Kathleen Austria denied, we asked for $10,000 in the resource center since 2010. And I'm not even talking about Garcetti and homeless. We're saying put your money where your mouth is. Our money where your mouth is. Then we can believe anything you say. Until...
Next speaker, please.
And we have no other comment cards on this item, sir?
Okay. What I'd like to do is go over, summarize if there will be a motion to approve the action step, what amendments there would be, subject to quarterly reporting, information sharing. Commissioner?
Well, there were a number of things suggested. I hope I was not responsible for keeping track of all of them, but they certainly included, if there were any replacement of an offender-based program, that it would come before the commission before enactment, that the academic or external review of these programs include and address the original questions we asked the Inspector General to address, and if that's not possible, that the Inspector General address them in a separate report, and that he review any academic report that's produced on behalf of the commission as well. That the manuals be brought to the subcommittee for review before implementation. What else did you had? And the community. I appreciated the dialogue about the community surveys, and that when we're understanding, this was Commissioner Bonner's contribution, when we're understanding the impact that these programs have on communities, that they include the impact on trust and the impact on other people who may have been swept up in this process, or other innocent people, and that the community surveys in particular target the communities that are most directly impacted by these policing strategies, to understand their perception and the impact that it's having on them. Commissioner Bonner, were there additional things? And I believe Commissioner...
I think my questions at this point are maybe procedural, in the sense that we need all of that information and probably some more in order to approve a report. So I see the agenda list or calls the question as to whether we should be approving the department's report, which I'm not in a position to do today, absent the items that we're asking for. So that's really the clarification I think that we need, is to whether the sense of the commission is to receive additional information and input and then reconsider the report, or whether it's the intention to vote on the report as it is today.
Okay.
Commissioner Goldsmith, I did ask for the department to work with the subcommittee to provide additional information regarding the data, both that supports the effectiveness of the crime fighting program that they have put forward, as well as indicating how they're going to measure its effectiveness to the community and lack of disparate treatment to community members.
Okay. I'm going to move to recommend for the board's action, the approval of the Inspector General's report. Number 2, to review the review of the Inspector General's report. And 3, approve the department's report with the amendments as stated by Commissioner Goldsmith.
What does that mean in terms of approve the department's report? I mean, we've got it.
The department will begin the programs, and will begin to and continue to evaluate the programs, provide information, that we will not be shutting down the programs and waiting for other information. That's what it means.
I'd like to ask a procedural question, Mr. President.
Yeah, go ahead.
My procedural question is that the agenda says to approve the department's report, but there are no recommendations, I think, in the department's report. Isn't it just review, much like the number 2 on our agenda? I'm not sure what we're approving. I think we're approving the Inspector General's report. Is that not correct?
Well, it says...
As a matter of procedure.
The department's report indicates a recommended action that the commission review and approve the report. If you do not wish to approve it, you can review the report, since it does not have specific recommendations as you indicated. What I would suggest is that as part of a formal motion, that you would encapsulate the 3 reports, review those that you want to review, and approve those that you want to approve, and then direct the department to work with the subcommittee to come back with the information that Commissioner Goldsmith asked for, Commissioner Bonner asked for, and you asked for, Commissioner, and then bring that report back to the commission when that report is concluded with the additional information that you've asked for. There is, according to the department, and I will repeat what I heard them say, there is no chronic offender bulletin program working today. That program is not working. Laser is not working. The PredPol program, they are looking at reevaluating how they are going to implement that program. So that's the status of where we are today. And so my recommendation to you is to have the department report to the subcommittee in a more working type session, and then bring those recommendations back for the information you have asked for today. That would be the most efficient.
Chief, hold on, Chief?
So the, as a department, the commission's decision to review, approve this, obviously the department's going to come back with the requested information, work with the subcommittee, and then make the follow-up actions available to you. I have the list of those, and as well as the circulation of how in the Office of Operations will demonstrate an accountability loop relative to the instructions provided with the use of the manual, the strategies, how they're to be implemented, and how we're going to evaluate that on an ongoing basis to ensure adherence. It's really, from a procedural standpoint, the department's actions will continue unless there's direction from this committee, from this commission differently. And this is more parliamentary as to what you're going to do with this report.
Okay. So I want to be clear, there will not be a shutdown of these, or a change in the training. You would be...
That's correct. That is correct. That is not on the agenda.
That's my question. I don't know if it's on the agenda, but that is my question. But, okay. Okay. So do we need, do you want to separate?
Yes.
Or let's make a motion. Go ahead.
I mean, I would move approval of the Inspector General's report.
We have a second?
And I guess, well, so I think that's probably, I don't know what we're amending. Yeah, so I guess we could incorporate all the amendments we've all laid out into that report. I don't know if I think that's probably the most simplest thing to do.
Okay.
Right, all the questions we raise and the additional report backs we want would go along with the approval of the Inspector General's report.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Is that 4-0?
That's 4-0.
Okay. Okay. Number 2? We've reviewed the Inspector General's report. That's not an action step. Okay. Number 3 is approving the department's report.
So, and can we amend that to be just reviewing
There's
the
nothing to-
department? Or receive
Okay,
and
so we can receive and file and request the information that we've requested. Okay?
We already have.
Yeah,
We
just
just
request
that.
that made.
Yeah. Okay?
So it's just receive and review?
Okay. Yes.
And file.
Review and, receive and file.
Receive and file.
What I would suggest is you could make the motion to receive and file the department's report, instruct the department to report back on those items that were enumerated.
Okay.
Okay.
Ditto what?
A motion?
Yeah.
Want to make the motion?
And can I add to that? I mean, there are a number of concerns raised about the flawed data, and I would like a deeper understanding of that in a subsequent report about upon what basis the data is derived, and directly addressing the critiques that have been raised in terms of the flawed data that under reporting of crime in certain areas, leading to fewer arrests in certain areas, and how that drives the predictive policing process and concentration of resources in certain neighborhoods.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, 4-0. Let's go to item number 2B, the verbal report.
It is our duty to fight for freedom. It is our duty to fight for freedom. It is our duty to win. It is our duty to win. We must love and protect one another. We must love and protect one another. We have nothing to lose but our change. We have nothing to lose but our change. It is our duty to fight for freedom.
Okay, enough.
It is our duty to win. It is our duty to win.
I'm going to recess.
We must love
We're going to recess and clear the room, and then we will finish with the media. Okay, we'll go with the department's verbal update relative to the status of the supervisory position cross-training. Can we do this quickly, please?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay.
Morning, everyone. How are you today?
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any, oh, you want to do it a little longer than
More
that?
like good afternoon. Yeah. So, Commander Leslie from Training Group. I'm with Captain Casey. He's the new captain in Service Training Division. Quick update on Supervisor Cross Training Program. We did analysis of the program and identified a few issues with the program. So this is one of our older employee development programs. It predates some things we have in place today, which have created some barriers to the system. The 312 in patrol has made it unattractive for some people in patrol to participate in the system, as conversely it has with the detectives with their schedule. Also, some of the bonuses are affected by by moving out of patrol. This is a one-year program. It didn't have any real tracking system. The benefits weren't qualified, and there was no one oversight committee. So what we asked for and what we are doing is creating an employee development and loan program, which would be much shorter. It's a 90-day program. It could be as long as necessary, but a 90-day program is best for us. And it's more inclusive. We would include all ranks, not just the supervisory rank. We think it would generate more participation. We'd have a formalized application process, a formalized tracking system, monthly feedback to the employee, and we believe it'd be mutually beneficial, not just to the employee, but also the command. And because some of the loan opportunities out there are very specialized units, we'd supplement the program with workshops as well as podcasts. I'll ask Captain Casey to get into the specifics of the program, but just to give you some timelines, because we've been here before and I want to give you some timelines. The podcast, we should have those up and running within 2 weeks. Well, I've met with the employee organizations already. They have a workshop coming in June. They have allowed us to tape record those or to video record those, and we'll be able to post those on our website as well. Our career development unit is doing a survey currently, first line supervisors, to get their feedback on what type of workshops they would like. And there should be a notice coming out on the employee development and loan program in the next 30 days. I'm very confident we can have one of our own workshops up within this quarter. Captain Casey, if you can just give some specifics on the program, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. And you pretty much covered a lot of it, so. Well, we really want to get ready and get this program up and going. It's been talking about for 3 years, so our recommendations to get this program up and going is to revise it and bring it up to date, as the commander has mentioned, which includes all employees instead of just supervisors being cross-trained in specialized areas and specialized units. The most important factor of it is it has a measurable component now where we can, have the data on officers and detectives and supervisors that do participate in it. We weren't tracking that before. And it also has a component in it which allows us to input it into the employees' learning. It's our LMS system, which is a learning management system, and on their teams too, so that it's documented. And when employee applies for an interview or promotional, when we run their 1588, which is and their teams, it will show up at the top of the teams as they participate in the program. So the program is designed to, again, be a short-term program that is 90 days as opposed to taking a year. And this 90 days will have a minimum impact on our operations, especially our patrol operations, which is very important that we get our officers out in the divisions, on the streets. So this allows officers to apply for these positions, these in the specialized areas, and to gather the knowledge and experience of that specialized area that they can return back to patrol or any other entity that they're working with that knowledge and pass it on to other folks that they're working with. And I think that's a very important component of this training program. In addition, I mentioned that we have a tracking system. We'll have a curricular number that will be assigned to it. Every employee that applies and is accepted and and goes into the program will be evaluated at the end of 3 months with a special rating. And when that special rating will attach at least three comment cards, accommodations possibly, or any other documentation that say it wasn't a good program for that employee would be in the documentation. And that is a measurable factor on how the employee is doing on this training program. And we will take that and then input it into, like I said, the LMS, and then the training coordinator for their area will maintain a copy of that and also send a copy of that to our division for maintaining and tracking. And
So there are several loans going on currently. If we just formalize those loans and actually gave feedback to the employee and mandated the employee give feedback to its command at the end of the loan to come back and say, this is what I've learned and this is what the benefit was, then we can actually truly have an employee development loan program. So that's what we've done. We've taken a way to track it, to get feedback, and also for it to be available to promotional boards on people's teams as well as in their package.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Any public comments on this one?
We have two comment cards. We have Mr. Herman and Jonathan Foster.
Just I had one quick
Oh.
question or a couple questions. First, I apologize. I was a couple seconds late as you got started, but are these mandatory or voluntary?
Bless you.
voluntary, sir.
Voluntary. And then also, can you speak to the trainer side of the equation as to are there any particular adjustments or?
I didn't catch that, sir.
Speak to the trainer part of the equation. So I understand the trainee that you explained, people who are going to be receiving training. Are there any adjustments or being made on the trainer side of the equation?
Yes. So depending on the unit they would go to would depend on what type of training would be set up for them. And really, this program is about them identifying if it's something they would want to do and what it takes to be in that unit and be successful in that unit. So in many ways, they're shadowing people, but we want them to be participatory as well. That's why we're asking that that the supervisor does a monthly either commendation or comment card, and we're also asking for the employee to give feedback on what they learned during the program. The training would be very specific to the unit. A gang unit has a very different training component than an administrative position.
I think part of what I'm asking is when you say you're standing in the shoes, you're a trainer, is the training that you're providing any different to someone who is on loan to the program and who you know to be on loan versus someone who may be permanently assigned to a particular area?
Well, we have stopped all loans where we're loaning someone outside the division or loaning someone within our commands, so that we have that opportunity to get more folks back on the streets working patrol. And this program would be where we're temporarily loaning them for a 3-month instead of the year, because generally loans are a year long. And this allows us to rotate more officers, more detectives, more supervisors through the program, and allows those folks to get more education, more knowledge, and also improves the morale of the department, of the officers participating in it.
And
I understand. Oh, sorry,
please.
Chief.
Please.
Well, if I understand your question, the answer would be yes. Someone who's going to be long-term inside a unit would have one type of training, and someone who's going to be short-term inside a unit would get something different. We want them to just get a feel for that position and see if it's something that they feel they want to do in their careers.
And I'll just echo that, for instance, as an example specifically, you have a sergeant who's working a patrol assignment in say, Newton Division, and he or she, from a career development standpoint, is considering attempting to compete for a position as a detective. This is meant to give them a short but intensive experience, situational awareness. The local detective supervisor would be providing some orientation, expectations, and feedback. I'm encouraged by the feedback we're giving. That's a new aspect of this program, so that the person's just not writing the position for 3 months, but they're getting feedback as to their performance. And then from the candidate, we're hearing feedback as to the value and what would perhaps make it better, what would make it worse. And conversely, we have And this is really meant to build diversity. We have a number of detectives. Our representation of women within the detective ranks, however, for instance, is higher than it is on a supervisor and a sergeant level. We're encouraging detectives to come over to the sergeant rank and work as a field supervisor. Now there's more instruction there because now they're in a supervisory role. So there is greater levels of scrutiny and design and structure because they're now signing reports and acting as a supervisor. But again, it's a 3-month instance, whereas a sergeant going, a brand new boot sergeant, what we would call probationary sergeant, would be in a training position for 6 months, which they're getting orientation, development training, and feedback through from their lieutenant. So it's much more of an orientation and get to know the position and see how the fit goes, and there is development aspect than a regular assigned individual.
So if I'm a trainer, I'm a training provider. These two gentlemen come in for training. Are they coming in as two people who are in this kind of temporary assignment role, or is one of them permanently going to that unit,
Right.
and one of
So-
them temporary? And am I aware of that and
Right.
treating them differently and so on?
So please discuss a sergeant on a promotional list or an officer who's on a promotional list before they become a sergeant. Their participation in a sergeant school versus a detective who is going to go cross-train as a supervisor. What would be the difference? One's an orientation versus one is a permanent assignment.
Yeah, so someone going on a promotional list going to make sergeant, they would go through an entire 1-month training cycle going to sergeant school. Then they'd make sergeant and be on a 6-month probationary time, getting feedback from their watch commander as their probationary sergeant. Someone who goes on a 3-month loan to detectives, let's talk about like a gang detective, a long-term person being assigned to a long-term gang detective spot. Ideally, we would want them to be able to testify as a gang expert. The 90-day loan wouldn't achieve that. A 90-day loan is just for someone to go to gang detectives to determine if that's a good fit for what they want in their career.
So again, what I'm asking is the same person providing both, accommodating both officers? That's what I'm
Absolutely.
asking. So it's the same trainer?
Yes.
And is the same information given, albeit a lighter version for someone who's simply coming in to, lack of a better term, get their feet wet, get oriented, and
Yes,
it's gonna go
absolutely,
back.
sir.
But the
Again-
same person is the same person that's training the long-term detective is also training that's okay. Yes,
Yes.
that's right. Thank you.
The trainer that's one of their roles. In other words, you don't walk into detective bay and there's not like, here's the trainer and here's the supervisor. The training aspect of the supervisor's role, it would need to adjust to the nature of the individual.
Okay.
Do we have the public comments? Mr. Herman?
Mr. Herman?
So, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that the role is very important. You need to take over, Herman. I'm kind of nervous about this.
So the programmatic issue is whether or not rank and file should participate in all activities regarding workshops. Workshops can be very instrumental. At the same time, we all are entitled to learning. We should all have the ability to learn with our peers. So that way we're in connection on the same page, right? Otherwise, 1 + 1 + 1 is triad. No, that means 3. 1 + 1 is 2, and the workshop will work for rank and file 2-2. See, which gives you 4. 4 ideas to get the process going. But because the system on the data and the component that we keep tricking ourselves on is not working, we have to allow more than just a month of training. We should adequately give them 3 months with paid training, in addition to using their personal phones as part of overtime training. And when they sit at home on their computer researching the process of this data, they should fall under that same category of overtime, paid work time at home. Because rank and file have a very dangerous job. You know, you can get hurt typing all those words and researching on the computer, because I've done so myself in my field of expertise, not knowing shit. But these rank and files have the same considerations of sergeants and those of lieutenants.
Jonathan Foster.
Hi, Jonathan Foster. I think everybody needs to know what the chief knows. That's what I think. And what I suspect when there gets to be a bigger issue goes on, multiple issues go on across the city, you need everybody to know what you know. So I would expand your training concept to overlap. That's what you're already doing. That's what you're talking about, moving people from here so that they know this, that they know that. But everybody needs to know. Actually, I had a concept where the last cadet needs to be the chief of police, and you actually need to be in the car out on the beat. You're the one with the most experience. You're the one that can handle people the best. You're the chief. We need to put the cadet that hasn't been out there, doesn't have any experience, as the chief of police and train that person to be the chief. That way we get the most talented person, which is the chief of police, to deal with the public. That would be a great training addition to the LAPD. Do you feel that you have the most experience here? I think you do. You don't have the most experience. You have a lot of experience, though. Obviously, you're a chief. Well, I think you need to be in the car dealing with the suspects that have the guns, the people that have the problems. That would be a great thing. As you train these people, in one of your training apparatus, I don't know what to call it, one of your training programs would be to train these people with the nets so that they hit people with nets. 1, 2, 3, 4. You have the bean bags. You can get rid of the bean bags. You can get rid of the tasers. You can hit people with nets. You can train people that way. That'd be a great thing to train. And then you could train officers to operate with head-to-toe body armor. That way they don't have to kill anybody. And that way, what I like the most is no officer can be killed. See, I smile about that.
Okay, let's go to item number 2C. Are there any commissioner questions on the audit, property division audit? Okay.
Good morning, Jeffrey Phillips, Commanding Officer of Audit Division.
Good afternoon.
Or good afternoon, yes, of course, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Sandy Russell. I'm the Commanding Officer of Property Division.
Good afternoon. I'm Wendy Gamble, the Officer in charge of Audit Division.
Good afternoon. Thank you again for the hard work of the Audit Division on all of these audits. I do have a few, I think, minor questions. My first question is on footnote 2, the 12 unstaffed locations. And I understand it's the subject to a future audit, but my question goes really towards, I'm not sure if that was a surprise to you that there were 12 unstaffed stations, whether there should be property rooms, or if there are certain types of property that can be put in unstaffed locations. So I just wonder if you can address that briefly.
As far as whether it was a surprise, it was my understanding, and I knew that there are some property rooms that were not staffed due to the lack of staffing. But I will let Ms. Russell address.
Thanks. I just couldn't understand from the wording used.
We currently have 10 property rooms that are unstaffed. They do contain live evidence. We do have property officers and supervisors that do visit those rooms when we do need to retrieve evidence that is stored there. There was a council motion last year that funded and approved authorities to restaff the remaining unstaffed rooms. We are working on that to restaff the remaining 10 rooms as we're bringing staff on board.
So this was a funding issue?
That is correct.
Understood.
I should say a funding and personnel issue.
Understood. I certainly appreciate the department is going to be updating a form from 1971. Sounds like an excellent idea. With respect to the visitor rosters that were provided late, I see the department did provide them late. When something's provided late, just as a matter of general auditing procedures, are they then reviewed, or is it, from your report, it looked like they may have provided it late, but you didn't review them to determine whether they were satisfactory. Is that accurate?
My understanding, and Wendy, you can touch on it. My understanding, they were provided to audit division, and my expectation would be that they were reviewed. Wendy?
Yes, they were reviewed.
They were reviewed, okay.
It was probably 3 to 4 months later, but they were reviewed and we considered them.
And you consider them, okay, thank you. With respect to the audit cards, if I read the report correctly, you did identify those who had the cards and the cards worked adequately. My question is there a way for the audit division to determine if there are other key cards that are used, let me rephrase that, whether there are other key cards that have been issued but have not been retrieved yet? If I understand the audit, you determined whether people who had the cards, key cards, whether those cards worked appropriately.
We determined whether they had a right to have access to the room, right?
And did you also determine whether key cards had been given out at some point and those persons no longer should have access to them, whether they've been retrieved? Was that part of the audit as well?
That was not part.
That was not, okay.
Of the audit.
And I think that's all the questions that I had.
Okay. Any other questions, commissioners? Do you have any public comments on this item?
We have Mr. Herman.
Okay.
So, in addition to stolen or misplaced representing key cards, it's apparent any dumb motherfucker sworn in can just walk into this so-called room, not just one room, 10 fucking rooms. You got it? 10 fucking rooms where you got narcotics, guns, ammunition, people's stories about fucking their girlfriends and wives, and issues all around what happens in Los Angeles. Because as Wayne Spindler and I have said, what happens in LA stays in LA. That's the reason why that speaker was talking about Mr. Hustle, why he got killed, because some of you were involved in it.
Off topic. Well, let's go to number.
Audit and funding issues is all about the Benjamins. You're not understanding what perpetuates the issue. The issue is you got 3 knuckleheads sitting there who can't tell us of those 10 fucking rooms who has the missing keys. For that reason why, and I'll tell you why, those fucking cadets drove off with our cars.
Okay, we're going to go to 2D. That's it. Thank you. Yeah. We have a motion to
Yes, so moved.
approve the department's report.
Yes.
I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, number 2D is the Ethics Enforcement Section Quarterly Report.
Mr. President, if I may, I forgot at the start of the meeting to inform the commission, then I think you're aware of it, but the public, that item 5A has been continued to next week at the department's request, a closed session item.
5A is the closed session item.
That's
There
correct.
will not be
Continue
a
to next
closed
week.
session item.
We will not
Okay.
do that today.
Okay. Okay, we're right now on item number 2D. Did we have commissioner questions on the Ethics Enforcement Quarterly Report? Do we have any public okay, I'm sorry.
Mine was, my question, I think, is pretty simple in terms of in reviewing the report, there's a list of some of the various ethical areas, if you will, that are reviewed. And some of them include, neglect of duty and so on and so forth. Where is the issue that we've heard a little bit about recently in terms of alcohol abuse or those types of problems? Are they covered in any way in this type of review? And if not, where might they be covered?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Tim Nordquist, the Commanding Officer of Special Operations Division. And to answer your question, sir, no, that would not be covered in this report. That is something that we do at Special Operations Division, but it is a separate section and is not included in this data.
Okay.
You done?
Or keep
If it's relative to just the question of where it's not included in this report, but can you give me the 5-second thumbnail on where it's captured, or is it captured in another report, or is it just captured differently, or?
Sir, I'd request permission to answer that in closed session,
We can handle the public session of it here. There's a quarterly, and perhaps Chief McCarthy might want to step up, but to talk about more globally, alcohol abuse, misuse of it, constituting misconduct, is an area that we report on quarterly as to a category of alleged misconduct. And the subsequent investigations and findings and actions taken, that is something that the department's quarterly disciplinary report covers, or not covers, but it addresses as to the instances of allegations, their investigation, and the findings and outcomes. Is that fair?
Yes, we do a quarterly report. We also work very closely. We have a number of things that we're doing to try to avoid these type of things, working with the league and coming up with strategies to prevent this type of behavior. We do, there are some things we can discuss in closed session that we do as special operations, but it's kind of after the fact, or if we believe that we have a pattern, we will look into them through special operations.
Okay.
We take every complaint, we investigate every complaint, and there are some things we do behind the scenes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I have a question, and to be fair, I'm not sure you'll have the information for me today, but perhaps you can either come back to me or at the next quarterly report. That would be fine as well. If I read the report correctly, oh, by the way, if you have the answer, I'd love to hear it too. But if I've read your report correctly, in the last year, 2018, EES conducted 133 tests, which touched roughly 262 officers. And I note that one of your goals or objectives is to create a sense of omnipresence throughout the department. 262 out of 10,000, I'm not sure achieves the goal of omnipresence. My question to you is really, what is sufficient to achieve your objective? Maybe it is 262. I'm not a statistician or someone who has analyzed these numbers, but if that is your goal, my question is, what is really necessary to achieve that goal? It strikes me 262 may not be it. And again, I don't want to put you on the spot because I think this question is coming out of the blue. Perhaps you've analyzed this and you have a range within a number of officers you'd like to reach each year, but that's the information I'd welcome having.
All right. Well, of course, we try to do as many tests as we can during each quarter. The tests that we have conducted over the last year are consistent with the number we've conducted over the last 5 years. So that's the pace what we've been going at. We try hard to do as many specific tests as we can. So we look for officers who have displayed specific patterns. And so in that sense, we're trying to maximize our resources and make our tests most effective. I feel that we have been doing that to the best of our ability. And I think it's important to know that we moved away from more random tests to more specifics, specifically to address, I think, which is your question of being effective with our resources.
The other thing to consider is
I'm not questioning that you're ineffective. I'm questioning whether just 262, it may be a resource issue. I'm not saying that there are resources to give, but I think it'd be helpful for the commission to know.
yes, and like Tim said, we do a lot of specifics, and some of them to recreate is very complicated. So we do as many as we can do with the resources we have.
And Commissioners, I will just join in for a moment as a bit of my memory. This sprang from the consent decree, some now 15 to 20 years old, and while the department has had its Special Operations Division as to its investigation of officer misconduct, and including efforts of proactively identifying those that may be engaged based on complaints or anonymous information. It was really the onset of the consent decree, as I recall, that set up the specific, systematic, regular, ongoing persistence. We are one of the few departments in American policing that has the number of resources that we have assigned to this. It is by no means statistically significant because of 1.7 million encounters last year involving uniformed officers, radio calls on just their stops. So this is yet another tool, much as our auditing of our body-worn digital video snippets, as well as digital infrared video and the feedback loops. This is another contributor. I'm proud of the work that they do because it is a substantial investment of resources that could otherwise be working in a law enforcement profession, but I do think it also is meant to demonstrate to the public that we will check and hold accountable our own through our own initiation, both in a systematic way, which is what the number of these tests and all of these categories spring from the consent decree, but then also specifically to allegations of any sense, of any rank in the organization, that we will utilizing these resources, attempt to test to demonstrate whether or not there is truth to the allegations.
We've maintained our numbers. Even through managed attrition, the chief has kept us whole. So we appreciate that.
That's very, very good to hear, and I think shows the commitment of the chief
Yes, absolutely.
to all of these issues. And I do appreciate, Chief, and I'm aware it was born out of the consent decree, or many things that were, and that today, in light of other programs as well, whether it be body-worn cameras, that there are many similar functions that the department can to do checks and balances. It still remains a question in my mind whether it's resourced properly. And I don't know the answer to that. When I look at 262, I'm not saying you're all not working hard. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting you're not using your resources well. I just can't help but question whether that is enough. I don't know the answer to that. And maybe it's worth further conversation down the road. But thank you for your perspective.
Okay, we have public comment on,
We have one comment card. We have Jonathan Foster.
Jonathan Foster, I didn't read the report, but the ethics enforcement, I've seen a great improvement in certain things. Maybe it's because I'm getting a little older and more lines on my face than when I was 18 or 20. So they look at me and they say, oh, this isn't a little kid. But I can tell you, I have been stopped by police officers who thought I was doing stuff wrong. And boy, I mean, I was just being anger baited. And where I wasn't angry, all of a sudden became angry. In the ethics, in that, I think because of people screaming at the top of their lungs, maybe some things have finally possibly changed. It's super slow. But that's one of the biggest causes of aggression back to the police officer is the anger baiting that goes on. I mean, I'm by nature not aggressive, really, just to hit a drum. I want to be better than Buddy Rich, but I can't. Or Tony Williams, I can't be better than Elvin Jones. But I do remember, though, how angry I was, and all of a sudden, wanted to lash out at the police officer that was wanting to ask me a whole bunch of questions. And I think I've seen some improvement, but when I've seen the police officer deal with somebody else who's not white, that's not what I saw. I saw continued anger baiting. And then I saw a little argument and a fight happen, and then somebody got arrested off of anger baiting when they actually hadn't done anything except now they assaulted an officer. You see, this is an ethical violation, big one. But I mean, it's taken a long time. I've said this before, though, in 10 seconds. It's the police department's a little bit like if I steal this guy's bicycle and he gets 10 of his friends and they find me, they're going to break my face. So I know people get mad about things. So maybe something can change.
a motion to receive the department's report, direct the Office of Inspector General to submit an analysis of the report along with any appropriate recommendations. I'll move. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to item number 2E, please. Thank you, guys. Okay. Does anyone have any commissioners have any questions regarding this contract? Do we have any public comments on this?
We have Mr. Herman.
Okay, Herman. Go ahead, start the clock.
I submitted a card like I do all the time. And again, the agreement between the city, Los Angeles,
Topic, please, last warning, this is item number E.
we're on E.
Yeah,
We're
right.
dealing with the Nexus Corporation. I can fucking read, you stupid puppet. In configuration to the relationship of management. I know what the fuck got to read. Under BPC pound 19-0196. Give me some time to speak, fucking retard. On the outline candidate portal service. You know, there was no board action of recommendation for all this fucking shit. The only report I and the mayor have is that the Mayor Garcetti has a lover named Glenn Dakin, the sock cock.
He's off topic, Mr. President.
We have no other comment cards.
Report of the chief. Chief?
Motion.
Need to vote on that,
Motion
sir.
for approval of the department's report, transmit to the mayor.
So moved.
Second, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay. Mr. Herman, I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting. You've been disrupting. Your language is disgusting, and your actions are disgusting. Leave. Leave. I've given you enough warnings. You've been disruptive on your way to the microphone, on your way back from the microphone. I let you speak when you're at the microphone. You can leave the meeting. And if I had my ability to choice, and I'd like to see if I can keep you from coming to these meetings in the future for a period of time, I will check and see if I can. If I can, I will. I'm not going to consult with you, so you can keep quiet too. Go ahead, Herman, go.
I'm leaving, fucker. Shut up. Let me leave.
This is your last warning, or I'm going to have you leave the meeting too. Chief?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, Chief.
So, just a couple of matters of reporting as to significant events this past week. On Friday, I want to thank Commissioner Vice President Ms. Decker for attending with us the Community Police Advisory Board Symposium. One of our strategic commitments this past year was to look at how our community police advisory boards are how they're constructed, how they're administered, the governance of them, their day-to-day operations. They're an important body of men and women who are stakeholders from throughout Los Angeles that has been in existence now for some 25 plus years. And I was an opportunity to on Friday morning to visit with them and talk with them, encourage their continued participation, but also and while reaffirming their importance, to talk about there is a governance process and to offer some I believe, more meaningful and purposeful guidelines as to why they exist, their actions, and what's expected and needed from them as they participate in this partnership. I want to thank Assistant Chief Grimala as well as Assistant Chief Arcos and Commander Rodriguez. Their work in revising these guidelines, working in partnership with the Community Police Advisory Board chairs, who then distributed the draft guidelines to the membership. And I'm confident we didn't have 100% approval of it. I do believe we had a consensus of people seeing the value of more detailed expectations and how the process works. Later that day, I was fortunate to attend at the invitation of Supervisor Mark Ridley Thomas and Department of Public Health Dr. Barbara Freire, the announcement of the Office of Violence Prevention by the Board of Supervisors. This is an office out of Department of Public Health that, for the first time in LA County's history, will attempt to map all the various supportive services and resources that exist for persons on reentry, persons experiencing homelessness, experiencing mental crisis, victims of crime, both violent as well as property. And the invitation to us as a department was we have a number of, if you will, grassroots or grass level initiatives with juvenile diversion, with providing resources to children who are trauma exposed, but there's really not a county clearinghouse to this point. And our invitation, I think, is going to improve our ability to help with victimization, with help with getting resources to people to break the cycle of violence and to allow people to, if you will, get back on the main street of their life in a sense of success and a happy and productive life. on Sunday, the department joined with a number of other local law enforcement agencies, public safety members such as the fire department, as well as our military veterans for the 4th annual Run to Remember. There was more than 6,000 participants there that day. I'm proud of the men and women of LAPD, as well as our cadets and recruits that participated in both the 5K, 10K, and half marathon. For the staff officers and command officers of LAPD, I was proud that we had a large contingent of them who marched in uniform and their full equipment for the 5K portion of it as a means of demonstrating support and our remembrance for those that have paid the ultimate sacrifice in the service of the city or this country. And so it was a very good and encouraging day. Last night, we had our LA Interfaith Council meeting. It's a monthly meeting that's hosted by our community engagement group, made up of faith leaders from throughout the Los Angeles area of all faiths. We met for some 2+ hours. And last night, the particular agenda item was Council Generals from Central America and their discussion on multiculturalism and religious tolerance. We had a presentation also by the country of Turkey, the Council General there, as to issues that we're seeing of a lack of religious tolerance or acceptance and the violence that we're seeing spring from that. It was a good opportunity to exchange information, reminding our faith community of resources that are available in the aftermath of New Christ Church and other attacks. Many of our faith community are concerned, children included, as to their safety, whether they attend a religious school or a religious ceremony. And so it was a good discussion. And then lastly, it was a point of also information that our Council Generals from the Central American councils have asked for us to renew our efforts with video vignettes and pamphlet information for our immigrant community, particularly from Latin America. Given the circumstances today of immigration reform or lack thereof, and the circumstances of immigrations being a topic on a national level, they're seeing a return, if you will, of some erosion of faith and confidence in local law enforcement. And so our efforts will go back to renew those videos and our pamphlets and information efforts. So this is again, this meeting last night was yet another effort by the department to continue in our engagement with communities throughout Los Angeles in an ongoing and recurring manner that identifies areas or gaps and reaffirms our commitment, as well as ensuring that we have a clear understanding of exactly what we've accomplished. Many times, for instance, on the immigration reform, this was an area of great deal of emphasis by the organization in 2015 and 16, and there was much success. And last night was the first report that we've received that there may have been some erosion in that in the last year. Now, much of that may have to do with the fact that many of these Council General positions change. Mm-hmm. And we have people who were not here during the earlier election cycles and so forth and are unaware. And so I think it just goes again to the concept of continually renewing those relationships and revisiting strategies, both of the past as well as identifying opportunities for the future. To talk briefly about crime, this last week we saw a reduction in the initial days after our press conference on Monday, but then this last weekend we saw a return to shooting violence that we spoke about at that conference. And what I mean by that is, for the week there were 21 victims that were shot, but 16 of those that happened between Friday night and Sunday. And so there was that surge, and 12 of those happened in Southwest 77th, Southeast, or Newton, in those 4 commands. So our continued efforts with our community engagement folks of our grid, our faith leaders, their vigilance in the field is important and needed. And we've also continued to shift resources, law enforcement, crime suppression resources back into some of these neighborhoods. As we have promised that as communities see higher levels of violence, we will shift visible police resources in an effort to help suppress or quell that violence, while interventionists and prevention specialists can come in and attempt to detangle and dissolve conflict amongst particularly gang members who are going back and forth each other with recurring shooting violence. More broadly across the city, I'm happy to report that that we still have a nearly 5% reduction in violent crime, and they have, and also, which is 334 fewer violent crimes this year to date versus last year, and nearly 2,400 fewer Part 1 crimes, with a reduction in every property crime category across the spectrum. The most pressing matter I have today is this last month in March, and it's continued into April, is shooting violence. Now, I will say that April last year was the lowest number of shooting victims and homicides for the entire year, and substantially lower than the previous 3 years before that. However, the reality of the matter is that the success we saw last year, we want to renew, and we want to continue and get restarted. And so we are working feverishly with our commands, with our community safety operations centers, with their individual commands. We now have, this last 2 weeks, I'm proud of South Bureau, who's putting a command officer in at night into the neighborhoods as an effort to ensure that our efforts are focused and efforts to counter out this spasm, if you will, of violence, and how do we get this back in a downward trend that we saw last year and that we saw in the first initial 2 months of this year. This is being driven by, this increase is gang related. There's a 20% increase in aggravated assaults that are gang related for an overall gang crime increase of 11%. That is 95 additional gang crimes this year versus last. So the numbers are concerning me, just that the recency of those numbers, the last 4 to 6 weeks, is where we're seeing the pressure specifically. We do have and have identified through our work with the communities as well as with individual gangs. We do see there are some turf battles, if you will, back and forth that's driving the vast majority of this. And so we're working again with Ms. Tremblay of our grid out of the mayor's office, as well as our faith leaders to try to do everything possible to stem that resurgence. When I want to move over to officer-involved shootings, I report on this each week. For the year to date, we continue to have 2 officer-involved shootings. That number was 9 last year. That's a 78% reduction. The 4-year average is 13, so that's an even greater level. We have had 1 fatal officer-involved shooting this year. Last year, that number was 4. So we continue to experience success in our efforts to find alternatives and de-escalate and to be able to deal with threats while affording officers safety as well as the community and avoiding having to resort to the use of deadly force. By the way, the department is just finishing its 2018 use of force review, and as initial copies were provided to subcommittee members, and we'll be having that agendized, I understand, here in a couple weeks and we will look forward to coming and talking with you and answering questions. 2018 was the second lowest number of officer-involved shootings in more than 30 years. The 2017 was a third higher than the numbers we saw in 2018. So this year's trend, if you will, now we're into the 4th month. I'm a little more comfortable. There's a variability in data, but I'm still I'm encouraged by how we've started this year. Moving over to our traffic statistics snapshot. For overall traffic collisions involving serious injuries and deaths are basically flat. We have 1 fewer of those than we did last year at this time. However, our DUI-related serious injuries or deaths are up. We've had 20 of those this year versus 13 last year. And so that's an area that we're beginning to see some pressure on, that we want to make sure that we're paying attention to. On our motor vehicle versus peds, we've had 37 pedestrians that have been killed in a motor vehicle collision this year. That number was 30 last year. And of course, attention is drawn to the tragic circumstances last week in Newton Division with a truck driver. We're actively investigating that as to what his actions were that just led right up to that tragic outcome. On bicyclist-involved collisions, this year we're 23 either serious injured or fatals. That number was 26 last year. And it is a reduction that we're also seeing from 2016 at this point, as well as 2015, so I'm encouraged by that information. Lastly, I'm going to move over to our personnel status. We have 10,053 department sworn personnel on payroll, 2,981 civilian personnel that are on payroll, 388 reserve officers, and 1,428 cadets. And that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions
Do
you
you have
might
any
have.
commissioner questions? Do we have any public comments?
We have 3 public comment cards. We have George Bazzetti, General Jeff, and Jonathan Foster.
I don't know what good a chief of police report is when you guys are all up here breaking the law. I mean, what a joke. It's supposed to be law enforcement. You're running an illegal meeting. I called your secretary yesterday because you're not posted online.
Yeah,
Your secretary
let's get on
says-
topic. You can do this during public comment, Mr. Bazzetti.
You know damn good and well who the hell I am, Soboroff.
So
You've
this is on-
committed felonies on me, Soboroff.
Okay, so,
So your chief, maybe he ought to start paying attention to real statistics, okay? Are you familiar with the latest DOJ stuff that I just gave you, sir?
No.
Are you familiar with the 2003 DOJ agreement, sir?
Yes.
Why the hell aren't you following it? Do I need to read you the letter from Chief Beck saying you can break it and kill all the people you want? Huh? Huh? And you familiar with this May 16, 2018 letter from Chief Beck? Let me read the damn thing. Dear Mr. Bazzetti, an investigation into your complaint that was reported on November 7, 2016. That's 2 years. Regarding the conduct of employees of the LAPD has been completed, period. The investigation has gone through several layers of review, including myself and command staff of Internal Affairs Group, period. Your allegation department failed to implement the Internal Affairs Cooperative Agreement, that DOJ agreement, idiots. That employees failed to take your complaint against LAPD and LAUSD employees, that members of the police board of commissioners erased the police commission meeting audio video from the website, and that unknown employees denied your right to make telephone calls while in police custody have been classified as non-disciplinary, no misconduct. That's against Supreme Court decisions.
next speaker, you can come back during public comment. Jeff?
I'm putting you in prison, fool. Prison!
Yeah, he can leave the meeting now. He's been too disruptive. Mr. Bazzetti, you can leave the meeting.
I'm putting you in jail.
Okay.
So I'm gonna
See
pack
you
up
there.
my camera, leave the meeting, no big goddamn problem.
Go ahead, Jeff. He's leaving.
Good afternoon.
You can't handle your own crimes right in front of you, huh, Silverado? Is that it? I just read you your crimes, fool. Your crimes.
Mr. President, let the record reflect Mr. Bazzetti continues to disrupt the meeting and is preventing the public speaker from speaking at this time.
I'm also going to see, I may be off, but I'm going to try and see if I can keep Mr. Bazzetti coming from some future meetings.
He continues to disrupt the meeting, sir.
Oh, Soboroff, you're interrupting and disturbing the peace and the law.
As he's leaving the room, he continues to disrupt, and the speaker cannot speak at the podium.
Well, you know, I'm recording your stupid asses right now. And all of it, take your...
Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Chief, for your report. I'm glad that there are a reduction in OISs. Glad that there's a reduction in less deadly use of force. I was hoping that there would be some type of indication. I have a good community member that I know personally will be having a funeral tomorrow at Staples Center. And I was hoping that the chief would speak to some of the department's resources that would be allocated. I mean, it seems like there would be a lot of officer involvement in terms of escorting and things of that sort, but I didn't hear that, and so I'm kind of disappointed. But thank you.
Next speaker.
Jonathan Foster.
Hi, thanks, Jonathan Foster. I don't think you brought crime down. I know you've been doing a lot of talk with community members, to gangs, and prevention for this and prevention for that, but if we take maybe possibly Mr. Hustle's murder, if the guy didn't make that decision, then you can claim that you brought crime down. So somebody doesn't make a crime, then you can claim that you brought crime down. If 10 more people decide to commit crime, then you say we have to try to do something to try to stop that. One of the things that I've seen and I experience as a human being, and I think everybody in this room does, is getting in control of your inner emotional baggage to go out and do something you probably shouldn't be doing. I think it's just like the human condition. So one of the things that would bring crime down really would be talking on these public airwaves in the media to everybody to calm down, get control of your anger. I mean, this should almost be a commercial in between programs, you know, some video that shows where somebody can get angry, and another video that shows how somebody is able to deal with their emotions and not act out and lash out on people. It is true that Soboroffs and his buddies and the billionaires that are here are not paying, so people don't have money, so they go out and commit crime. But when you're mad at somebody else about interaction, I mean, I'm so mad at certain people, you would think that I would have already done something to some of these people. My life has been destroyed. I haven't hurt anybody. Why do I have that ability? Can you hurt me and hurt me and hurt me and hurt me? I'm 49 and I still haven't hurt anybody else. Now, how come somebody else doesn't have that ability? That's what you should be telling everybody in here. Get crime to it.
That's the last card on item number 3. We're on item number 4. We have 4 comment cards.
Go ahead.
We have General Jeff, we have Claudia Oliveira, Jeffrey Delshad, and Jonathan Foster.
Okay, go ahead.
Public
Public
comments?
comment, anything you want to say? Go ahead, Jeff, yeah. Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Commissioners, especially the new commission, we just want to, remind again that you all are citizen oversight, citizens that represent we the people. I want to make one suggestion. I don't know if you've done this before or even have this lined up too, but at the Los Angeles Police Academy, they have trainings. They even have simulation machines. I've been in some of those simulations at the Academy of Legion Park, and I saw a lot of bias there in terms of, so if the future officers are being trained in order to get through the academy with bias, the seeds are already being planted. So when you're providing oversights and there's reports going on about predictive policing and whether it's bias, unbiased, history of racial profiling, things of that sort, please take a look at what's going on in the academy and the training methods, because the bias needs to be removed from the training there as well. That's all I got. Thank you.
Next.
Next speaker, Claudia. Is Claudia here? Jeffrey Delshad and Jonathan Foster.
Good afternoon. I like the later time, even though it was a long meeting. I'm in favor personally of meetings that might happen later than 9:30. I know the other meetings with the city hall and other things seem to be co-occurring at the same time. So that's neither here nor there, perhaps. A lot of Jeffs here. Shout out to the Jeffs. I spent a certain amount of time in Santa Monica. I was actually born in Santa Monica. And around LA County, I was thinking, they say LA is like the city of the future. We are like the innovator. Look at that. We are the innovators or whatever of the country or the world. I feel like Santa Monica is like the LA of LA County. So that could be like the most innovative city in the region in a way. And I've noticed also that's like, it's one of one of the only police departments in the areas I frequent that's never like arrested me or I've never had any problems with. And they're just like cool. It seems like people just kind of respect their authority to a certain extent. I was actually discussing this with my dad over the phone, and we were talking about like property theft. Like from what I've observed, it seems like there seems to be some frequency with which there's like minor crimes committed by officers against members of the public, and that doesn't seem to go on in Santa Monica PD, as far as I know. It seems like it adds to their luster and support from the community. So that's for you to think about.
Jonathan Foster?
This is the last speaker.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So on public input today, I thought again talk about Mr. Soboroff and his buddies that aren't paying. There's about 23 billionaires here. You probably know them. Got the list. We got Musk, Geffen, Sung Xiong, Broad, Resnick, Roski, Tu, Redstone, family, the Gustafson family, Caruso, Gores, Milken, Spielberg, Sterling, Pritzky. These are all billionaires, and yet we've got 35,000 homeless people out here. When you die, and everybody on this list, they can't take a dollar with them. I heard that you were trying to run for mayor in 01 or something, 2002. You know, you could have people carrying you around on their shoulders. They would love you so much if you would unload, and all these buddies that you got that are billionaires in this LA County spent the money you can't take with you on the people that need it today, right now. And then we would probably like you. We would probably like the 23 or 6, whatever the number is, billionaires that live in LA County that are complete, wretched, dark-hearted people. That the darkest hearts in the world, that all these 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old men, when they got off in Normandy and D-Day, boom, 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 down in the water, boom, 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 boom. So you can't pay? So that the other 23 billionaires don't do a thing with their money when we got homeless people out here? I could get, with your money, even with just $500 million, I could get elected mayor like that. I could have these people pat me on my back, carrying me around on their shoulders. You don't know how to. You're going to burn in hell.
A motion for adjournment?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed?